Part 1. Hello everyone. Is this thing on? Well, I hope y'all have a great day. I certainly had a interesting one. Today we'll be reacting to the complete history of Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta Part 1. Yes, well, certainly. I hope this would be a great time, as it will be covering from 2002 to 2005, since it's Part 1. Now, I have no idea if this would work or not, but I am certain that it will work. So I'll keep it slight and go.
In late September of 2001, Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters began airing in the United States and almost immediately became a cultural phenomenon. The main focus of the show was the titular card game, and its massive success in America guaranteed that a physical version of Duel Monsters would hit store shelves in the near future. The game had already taken off in Japan and proven its potential market value, and so after making a deal with Konami to acquire the Yu-Gi-Oh! License, Upper Deck Entertainment sought to capitalize on the show's popularity and bring the game to a Western audience. And while I'm sure both Upper Deck and Konami were expecting the game to be successful, since its target audience was probably the anime fan base of kids and teenagers, I don't think
that is pretty sweet.
Anyone really could have anticipated that Yu-Gi-Oh! Would go on to become one of the most complex popular card games of all time, with a history and lore 18 years in the making, and just as deep as the one present in the anime and manga it was based on. While the only experience many people have with Yu-Gi-Oh! Comes from playing the game casually when they were younger, there's always been a fiercely competitive dynamic and perpetually evolving metagame. This is the story of Yu-Gi-Oh!'s competitive landscape, and how its many eras were defined by the strategies that dominated it, cards that would take the game by storm, and most importantly, its base of dedicated, creative players both willing and able to push the game to its absolute limit.
So, if y'all don't know, I'm a Yu-Gi-Oh! Boomer, so I usually tend to know the old cards. I don't really particularly like some of the new cards, especially Pendulum. I hate those. I really hate Pendulum so much. But we're gonna keep watching and see how they evolve their meta striking games. Should be fun. Also, Sangans right there. 2005. Alright. Part 1. I'm waiting for part 2, you know. March 2002, Blue Eyes White Dragon. Oh.
The Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game made its debut outside of Japan in March of 2002 with the release of Legend of Blue Eyes White Dragon, and
82 common? That's interesting. Sorry about that. Back to our regular reacting.
just like the anime had about 6 months before this, the game almost immediately exploded in popularity.
Pretty much everyone started playing it. Like, it wasn't just a nerd thing, it wasn't just like a weird person thing. The people that were playing sports were doing it. I mean, boys and girls were all
who is that?
Pretty much the entire like classroom was playing it.
At this point, though, the game's appeal, while widespread, was still mostly casual, so there was no metagame to speak of yet.
There was like no rule book or anything. LOB didn't really come with anything or something like that. So you really have to like
official rule book.
Really get some info about the game.
But it really was like the recess meta. None of us had sleeves. None of us really had deck boxes. You know, you got the rubber band around your deck and like a plastic baggie.
Oh my god.
This initial Wild West was pretty brief. Towards the end of the month, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game saw another major release, and the roots of the competitive game began to take shape.
Let me guess. Oh, the starter decks. Why, yes.
Although the Legend of Blue Eyes booster set was responsible for introducing new people to the game, the release of the Kaiba and Yugi starter deck was
interesting. Wow.
Yugi Kaiba format. That's like when, you know, a lot of people first got into the game. They got like their, you know, their starter decks.
Wow, that's
about these starters
fairly
is
nice.
that they
Not
gave
gonna lie.
potential players access to the game's official rulebook. This, of course, allowed a competitive scene to even exist in the first place. And while the overwhelming majority of Yu-Gi-Oh players were casual ones, local tournaments were already being held at various game shops, and many
Many
players
game
showed a
shops.
clear interest
Interesting.
in not only building the most powerful decks, but
There's some
playing that
interesting
deck
decks.
most optimally.
Most optimal.
I am told that this is a cross of chess and Pokemon.
Hell
How
yeah, it
exactly
is.
does one play Yu-Gi-Oh?
What
That is a very interesting way of saying Yu-Gi-Oh is a cross of chess. Well, I mean, yes, but I'm pretty sure it's mostly like MTG types.
could, at this point, describe Yu-Gi-Oh's rules as simple. Simple enough, anyway, that many people were
Alright.
able to pick up the basics just by watching the anime.
See, each card has an attack number, and
Alright.
first player to eliminate their opponent's life points wins the duel.
Like many
Thanks,
other
Taya.
traditions,
That is the
Yu-Gi-Oh
smartest thing you
built
ever
on the
said.
idea of stripping another player of the fight.
And probably the only useful thing you will ever do in this
Straightforward
season
and
1
typically
anime.
most effective way to defeat
I don't know if
player
the
buttons
rest of
has
the
always
season
been
she
to
was
use the effect of
good.
monster cards. Unless stated otherwise, all monsters
That's
have
all
the
2
ability to
dozen.
declare an attack
And
either
all
on an opposing player or
powers.
on another monster. And a monster's
All
attack point
knowing.
score is indicative of how much damage it deals when
And all
attacking and how
things.
powerful it is relative to other monsters. Given the landscape of the early
Interesting.
game, it may have actually been true at this point that this attack point score was the most important thing about a monster.
Lajin. Swordswoman? Summon Skull. Wow. Blue Eyes. Battle Ox.
Following the release of both starter decks, the card pool was still fairly limited. While Legend of Blue Eyes brought a whopping 126 cards into the game, many of them
126?
were almost completely useless.
Dang! 126 and all useless? I can't believe it.
It's LOB. The cards were just awful. Monsters didn't even have effects.
They're just normals.
87 of these 126 cards were monster cards. And
87.
82 were either normal monsters or
82.
monsters with no effect.
Oh.
Starter decks Yugi and Kaiba collectively added 59 more cards into the card pool, and 35 of them were also normal monsters. This meant that most of the available monsters
Wow,
were
that
free
is
and
slower than I
unused, and
expected.
truly exceptional
Wow.
work.
Oh my
Jin was
god.
like a beast. Time and time again, and it just being this money wall.
What? What happened? We skipped.
Of a brand new form of interaction, negation.
You activated.
What the hell?
Swords was a pretty big deal because, unlike WAP, was a powerful stalling card. Both saw about as much success as the staple trap cards of the era, but they
Alright, here we go.
undeniably worse.
Sorry
Truly
about that.
exceptional
What the
features.
hell was that
Jin
about?
was like a beast. 1800 beatdown. Let's
18.
go.
Lajin, the mystical genie of the
Jin
land,
was
a
pretty
level
cool.
4 monster with 1800
4?
attack, making
Yeah.
it the most powerful monster a player could summon without triggering a
That's
monster.
honestly
The game
awesome.
prohibited players from playing any more than 3 copies of the same card in their
Pretty
deck.
interesting.
Other weaker monsters like
Points.
the Magic Swordsman and Battle Ox, level 4
Some
monsters
Battle
with
Ox.
1700 attack
Eh.
were played alongside Lajin as they provided more consistent
Well,
access to powerful monsters.
that
would
is
be normal
kinda
playing.
cool.
Giant Soldier of Stone and even
The GOAT.
monsters like Aqua
I'm gonna say this. The GOAT, Giant Soldier of Stone. I don't really care about what you say about Elements of Hero Clayman. He sucks compared to Giant Soldier of Stone. That man's 13,000 beat stick compared to the Clayman, which only has 8,800, sorry. And dang. Aquamador?
Commodore, and Mystical Elves.
Yeah, so y'all keep hyping up Clayman. He's basically mystical elf, but a hero. These two are the goats.
Soft play due to their high defense size.
Like-
2000 was, after all, the highest baseline stat printed on a level 4 or lower monster by
Right.
far, but cards like these could typically only be used defensively, or as setups
Time and time again, and it just being
What
this
the hell?
money wall.
What the hell?
to lose by decking out. And that aside, it was also occasionally played as a powerful
Wrong
card
with
since Pot of Greed is now limited. Swords was a pretty big deal because, unlike Wabaku, it allowed players to stall for 3 pops.
God, what
But
is
not quite
wrong
as
with
good
this?
as either of these two was reinforcements. The focus
Third beatdown.
when people any more than 3
There we
the more
Oh my god.
points
There we
that
go.
printed on a level 4
I swear to God,
by
what the
far,
hell
but
was
cards
wrong
like
with
these
this
could
anyways?
typically only be used defensively, or as setups for the future summon of a monster like Summon Skull.
Summon Skull. best monster.
Dark Magician.
While
I
it would
love
have
him.
been cool if the format had been split between people playing Dark
He's
Magician and
awesome.
people playing Blue Eyes, Dark Magician was made obsolete by the level 6 Summon Skull. Summon Skull has, without a doubt, more attack points than any other one tribute monster.
That is
and is
awesome.
even more powerful than many 2 tribute monsters like Gaia the Fierce Knight and Red Eyes Black Dragon. Blue Eyes
Well, there you go. Friggin' Yugi, you should have chosen Summon Skull. Like, this lineup makes so much sense. And if it was in the anime, like, even in the manga, there's not a lot of Dark Magicians. In season 0, there's no Dark Magician at all. But this all feels right. Like, this just feels like the 3 pinnacles of what Yu-Gi-Oh means. I don't think Dark Magician even fully makes it.
on the other hand, was, with no caveat, no asterisk, the most powerful monster in the game, but this came at the cost of it being much more difficult to summon than Summon Skull. Summon Skull was more likely of the 2 to actually make its way onto the field, but if a person could manage to summon Blue Eyes, there wasn't a single monster that could kill it in battle aside from another copy of Blue Eyes. While these powerful normal monsters were the bread and butter of most early decks, they weren't the only monsters that saw competitive play. As few of them as there were, effect monsters did exist at this point, but many of them had effects that just weren't powerful enough to make up
Wait.
stats.
Monster cards possess magical effects referred to as effect monster cards. From the board range, 2 effects are divided. Types listed for following page.
Of the 13 available
Color-coded
effect monsters,
orange.
only 4 were truly useful, and even though it was so,
So
powerful, the
interesting
weakest of these 4 was
how
probably
things were.
Pain.
Like him for liking it. Gada. Sorry about that. My grandpa. Let's continue on with the watchings.
Pain, like many other early effect monsters, has a flip effect, meaning that its effect only activates whenever it flips face up, either by
Sorry about that.
initially send it face down or
Some
as a result
flies.
of being attacked while face down. Pain's effect allows a player to put any monster on the field back in the hand of its owner, which again was fairly powerful, but it was in most cases a strictly worse version of either Wall of Illusion or Man-Eater Bug.
I'd run Man-Eater Bug a lot more than I use.
Wall of Illusion was arguably the best of the 4, as it had both a powerful effect and a respectable stat line. Its 1800
Nice.
defense stat made it powerful enough to survive being attacked by anything that can be summoned without tributing, and on top of that, it would always at least temporarily remove anything that tried to kill it from the field. It effectively served the same purpose as Pain, but unlike Pain, it would usually remain on the field after being attacked due to its high defense stat, and it was also able to remove multiple monsters from the field, since its effect was not a flip effect and instead went off whenever it was attacked, even if the attack
When it's
destroyed it,
attacked.
and if it had already used the effect before. This made removing it from the field through battle incredibly annoying.
I should use that a lot.
Powerful enough to do it,
But
tribute summoned,
I
and even if
prefer
they were able to destroy the Wall of Illusion, they would be returned to
the
the
one
field
and only
afterwards,
Man-Eater
their owner would need to go
Bug.
through the process of tribute summoning them all over again. Man-Eater Bug and Trap Master,
Yeah.
the last of these 4, were like Pain, flip
That's
monsters
what I'm
with
talking
unique
about.
base effects. They actually seem to be part of a 3-part series along with Armed Ninja, as each of their effects targeted and destroyed one of the game's
Arm Ninja
4
sucks.
cards, monsters,
I'm gonna say
magic
this.
cards,
No, I'm gonna say this. Arm Ninja sucks, but his art is cool. But his flip effect sucks. Like why? Like you're so cool, but your effect sucks. Like these two. These are the goats. Trap cards usually have to be face down. So when it's flipped, boom, and your back row's defeated. And Man-Eater Bug at the time was honestly the best way to defeat Blue Eyes in most cases, because the only way to get another defeat a Blue Eyes is when they're Blue Eyes, or some equip spells and other stuff. So yeah, kind of interesting way.
Nobody played Armed Ninja because most back in the print stores of both Man-Eater Bug and Trap Master. Man-Eater Bug, Legend, and Wall of Illusion were the game's first true staple monsters, and found their way
true
into many decks, both competitive and casual alike. Trap Master wasn't quite as
Freaky,
omnipresent as any of these cards. They were still
freaky
popular
off
among
face.
competitive players due to the power of trap cards.
Alright, trap cards.
Trap cards offered the unique benefit of being
Hell
useful during
yeah.
the player's turn, and were usually
Of course,
designed
they're
to
all
take advantage.
purple.
There were only
They're
9
pretty
of them
cool.
launched between the first booster set and both starter decks, but a surprising number of them were actually pretty good.
Wow,
Without a doubt, the best of them were
crap.
Trample and Flopsy. Cards that
Hell
were so
yeah.
good that pretty much anyone who played
They're
the
the
game
best.
ran both
Honestly,
over. Trample was one of the most reliable forms of monster removal in the game, and was particularly useful against monsters.
to this day, like, people still use trap hole. That's how good it is. Even in 2002. It is the GOAT of the series. Like, and then there's Wabaku, which is basically a better version of any way of, cause like, in the,
Needed to be tribute summons.
it's
Flopsy,
either,
meanwhile, was one of
yeah, make all battle damage inflicted by monsters on your opponent's side on the field. That is not what Wabaku is. It's usually all monsters cannot be destroyed on your side of the field, if I'm not mistaken.
the only cards in the game that offered players any sort of protection from their opponent, and it was
Unless I'm
particular
thinking with
protection
card.
at that. It essentially skips the other player's battle phase after being activated, and since it could be activated at almost any point during either player's turn, stopping it was really difficult. Another trap card that was extremely popular, but not quite as good as I was used to, was Reinforcements. The focus was on
Reinforcements.
protection and the
No
battle
one
during this period
in
allowed
my
this card to shine.
in my
As good
like
as the game's few viable trap cards
many
were, however, they
many
couldn't
years.
compete with the power of
There's
what
no
was
one.
easily the best kind of card in the game, magic cards.
They used to be called magic? I thought it was spell cards. What? Card destruction, Swords of Revealing Light, Fisher, V-Spade.
Like trap cards, magic cards had effects that were, at the time, typically much more powerful than those given to monsters. Unlike trap cards and even flip monsters, however, magic cards can be activated immediately, with no setup at all required from the player. This made them inherently more powerful than most monsters and traps, for the simple fact that they were much, much faster. Two of the most popular early magic cards
As
were
long as
Wizard
they're
and
the
Swords
best.
of Revealing Light. These two were
Alright.
Trample and Flopsy, respectively. One to get rid of a monster, and the other was a powerful stalling card. Both saw about as
Except
much success
Swords
as
of
the
Revealing
big
Light
cards of
makes
the
it
era, but they were
3
far from the best
turns.
magic cards in the game. They were completely eclipsed by another group of cards, often referred to as the Power 5.
Power 5. Alright. Now we're talking. We're talking Monster Reborn. We're talking Drangeki. We're talking freaking Dark Hole. What else? Monster Reborn, Dark Hole, yeah.
These weren't
Alright, so we got Dark Hole, Monster Reborn, Change of Hearts, Pot of Greed, and Raigeki. 3 Destroyers, 1 Revive, 1 Switcher, and 1 Drawer.
just the most powerful magic cards in the game. They
No
were, by a wide margin,
Jar
the
of
most
Greed?
powerful cards in the game.
I mean, these cards are iconic, right? Those are
Is that Simo? Oh my god, that's Simo. Nice.
classic.
Any deck that included them was better for it, and they were played by pretty much anyone who had access to them. They were so powerful and so widely used, in fact, that they led to the creation of the game's first forbidden and limited list, where many of
Oh no, no. Forbidden list. You gotta be kidding me.
them have remained for the entire.
Oh, you can only use 1. Exodia, Pot of Greed, Change of Heart, Dark Hole. Oh man. The ban list. The first ban list. I can't believe it.
The first edition of this list went into effect at the beginning of May, but it didn't actually ban any cards. 10
No banned? So Pot of Greed was free?
cards were limited and 2 were semi-limited. The first 5 cards to be placed in the limited section were the 5 pieces of Exodia. While these cards did act as an alternate win condition, they have almost never been at the center of any of the game's most powerful decks. It was probably for the best that they were placed here, but it's hard to say that this had a substantial effect on the metagame. What ended up being far more impactful was the decision to limit the previously mentioned Power 5 magic cards.
I can completely understand why these cards were all limited in the
Okay, this is CMO, right? Or that's NBT. I can't tell. Was it NBT or whatever?
Slash format warping cards for the time. When you have a card that literally just says destroy all monsters on your opponent's field, it's crazy, right? And
Crazy
it's
indeed.
So funny that
CMO.
a card that literally just says draw 2 cards was limited, but like now in modern Yu-Gi-Oh sense,
Draws
banned.
2.
That just goes to show how powerful drawing cards is in this game.
The 2 cards placed in the semi-limited section while card destruction was not omnipresent in the early game, it may have been problematic if everyone could play 3 copies of it in their deck. This card in multiple quantities hypothetically makes it very easy to force another player to lose by decking out, and as an aside, it was also occasionally played as a powerful draw card since Pot of Greed was now limited. Swords was a pretty big deal because, unlike Wabatu, it allowed players to stall for 3 turns instead of just 1.
Like, stalling 3 turns was like, oh, I can draw into my red deck.
This ban list was the last major event of Yuki's Hyper format, which meant that the game was able to stabilize over the course of the next month. With Dark Hole and Raigeki limited, Fissure has become the most consistent way to get monsters off of the field.
That is a lot of
It was one of the most reliable ways to get rid of a
noted.
illusion without attacking it, and it also made committing to a tribute summon too early very risky, which led many players to wait to summon their deck's boss monster until they had at least 2 monsters already on the field. This is one of a handful of reasons that Summon Skull Beatdown ultimately became the best deck of the format. Setting up a field of 3 monsters before summoning the Blue Eyes was pretty tough, and in many cases even...
Yeah, sorry, Dark Magician. Your ass is not meta. Summon Skull. Is that his nose? Okay, that's his mouth. That's nose? Dang. Alright.
properly played around it, their
Cool.
just get destroyed by Crap Hole, or perhaps even Raigeki or Dark Hole. For this reason, those truly dedicated to making Blue Eyes work often played Lord of D and Bakuda Summoning Dragon, cards that could help
Lord of D. We all know what D stands for. Drago. Anyways.
bypass the need to tribute monsters entirely. A handful of other cards were experimental.
Soul Exchange, Just Desserts, Dispel. The Dispel.
Its first major shakeup, brought about by the June release of its next 4 booster set.
Metal Raiders. I'm gonna say this right now. Metal Raiders is probably my second favorite booster box, right next to Magician's Force. That's kind of cool. Heavy Storm. Hell yeah.
44 cards to the game, and thus nearly double the available cards to it.
Nice.
Not all 144 were actually good, but given the sheer volume of new cards, the game was bound to see a noticeable leap in power. While Beatdown decks, and Summon Skull Beatdown decks in particular, continue to
The GOAT.
dominate the meta, the cards added in Metal Raiders almost completely changed how these decks and the game in general is played.
Magic Jammer. Alright.
Surprisingly, this set's magic cards were actually largely overshadowed by many of its key traps, which
Stim
brought
pack.
in the idea of a brand new form of interaction, negation.
You activated my trap cards actually started to matter.
Unlike, for example, Crap Hole and Wabatu, these were not cards meant to respond to one action or effect with another. The purpose of these new cards was to prevent certain things from happening on text.
Negate 1, negate trap, negate a summon. Oh, negate a magic, and negate an attack. So these are the 5 legendary traps that can negate one of these. This one's fairly interesting.
There were 5 new cards with a negation clause in this set, and 4 of them in particular were designed to negate individual cards. All of them were counter-track cards, meaning that they couldn't be responded to once they were activated except with other counter-track cards, and they all allowed the player to trade some of their resources in order to completely negate the activation or summon of another card.
When the trap is activated. Honestly, I'm gonna be honest. 7 Tools of the Bandit. I feel like Bandit Keith just dropped it. Like, it's his 7 tools, and Bandit Keith just accidentally drops it around Duelist Kingdom. Heavy Storm's pretty awesome, not gonna lie.
What's interesting is they all asked the player for something different in exchange. They all had a different cost. And because of this, Solemn Judgment and Torn of Heaven saw very limited play.
A lot of people do not like Solemn Judgment.
Wow.
It's the unnegated, you just pay half the lifetime. I think it's fascinating that this didn't just become like a staple immediately out of
just crazy.
Three of this just because of how powerful the target is.
They valued life points a lot
They
more. Like,
valued
was
it
just a
more.
race. It wasn't about maintaining a solid position as much.
Magic Jammer and Seven Tools of Your Bandit, on the other hand, did see immediate and
Both are awesome.
with Magic Jammer being the more popular of the two. Despite how good many of these new traps were, the Power 5 were still the best cards in the game, and negating any of them was typically better than negating another trap card.
Like, oh, but what if the Raigeki spent all this time setting up my entire field and they're just going to destroy it? Then they started to realize, hey, I can use stuff in my hand to kind of substitute for destruction.
That said, there was one new trap card in this set that could give the Power 5 a run for their money.
Mirror Force. That is the
Mirror
best
also had an
card.
monster attack, but what was much more important was after it negated the attack.
Destroy all. Destroy all. Mirror Force. Like a force of mirrors. Like, pew. Like, it's insane.
Mirror Force is just it's a board wipe.
It's a full
It's a board wipe that you get to
board
use on
wipe.
your opponent's turn, which I think what was so appealing about it.
Especially with Mirror Force, where people have to manage Reapers, not
Basically, Raigeki onto a trap. But only an attack, not a defensive. Sorry, y'all.
will commit. That's when that evolution starts to really take place in TCG anyway.
And then here comes the rest of the cards.
The monsters out of the Metal Raiders were just as, if not even more impactful than the new traps. First of all, there were two new monsters that challenged Legion's position as the game's most powerful level 4 monster, 7-colored fish and Dark Elf.
Hold on, I get something. Yeah, I fucked up. Everything was muted. I fucked up. Everything was muted. Everything was fucking muted.
These two almost immediately made many of the normal
Fucking
monsters that had been popular before the release of Metal Raiders obsolete. With 7-colored fish in the game, there was no reason to play Neo or Battle Ox, and cards like Mythical Elf and Giant Soldier.
Fuck me, but we're gonna use it. We're gonna use it. We're gonna try to use it. We're gonna try to use it. Wait, is everything muted? Everything's muted? Hold on.
Zone were a lot less useful than Dark Elf since they can be used to attack.
People started to identify, like, they started min-maxing one time with a level 4 monster, have to have 18 hits.
Hold on.
Tons of attack, or else it's
A staple immediately out of the gate. Like I think looking back, some people are probably just like, I don't know why we just weren't all running 3 of this just because of how powerful of a card it is.
They valued life points a lot more because it was just a race.
now
at the
it
time.
works.
It
Wow.
wasn't about
Yeah.
maintaining a solid position as much.
Magic Jammer and 7 Tools of the Band.
Fucking hate this. I fucking hate this. Hold on. Fucking god, I hate this. You're the worst. You're the worst. Oh my god, I hate it. I hate it. I hate it here. Fucked up.
Bandit, on the other hand, did see
fucked up. I
immediate
thought
and
it
widespread
was okay.
success,
I
with
thought
Magic
it
Jammer
was-
being the more popular
Oh
of
my
the
God,
two.
the
Despite
stream
how
was
good
muted
many
the
of
whole
these
time.
new traps were, the
Fucking
Power
hate
5
this.
were
This is
still the best cards in the game, and negate
Anyway.
negating any of them was typically better than negating another
Fucking
trap card.
ridiculous.
Like, oh, but what if they Raigeki me and I spent all this time setting up my
Well,
entire field?
I hope y'all learn to unmute your goddamn thing, because I completely forgot. I am a total dumbass. Please do not do what I did. My volume sucks. My volume sucks. It tends to be like that.
And they're just gonna destroy it all. Then they started to realize, hey, I can use stuff in my
Anyway,
hand to kind of substitute the destruction.
That said, there was one new trap card in this set that could give the Power 5 a run for their money.
Mirror Force.
Mirror Force also had a negation clause. It negated monster attacks,
I really
but
hope
what
this
was
doesn't
much
get
more
copyrighted,
important
'cause I
was
swear to
after
God,
it
dude,
negated the attack.
Like, most of the
Mirror Force is just, it's a board wipe, but it's a board wipe that you get to use on your opponent's turn, which I think what was so appealing about it.
Especially with
is
Mirror
that-
Force, where people have to manage the resource, not overcommit.
I
That's
can't
when
believe
that evolution started to
stream
really
was,
take
like,
place in
fully
TCG
muted.
anyway.
I'm so sorry. For everyone who's reacting. You dumbass. But, where
The
you
monsters
going?
added in Metal Raiders were just as, if not even more impactful than the new traps. First of all, there were 2 new monsters that challenged La Jin's position as the game's most powerful level 4
Jin,
monster,
the
7-colored fish and the Dark
7-colored
Elf.
fish
These
and
2 almost
Dark
immediately
Elf.
made many of the normal
Dark
monsters that had been
Elf.
popular before the release of Metal
Dark
Raiders
Elf.
obsolete. With 7-colored fish in the game, there was no reason to play Neo or Battle Ox, and cards like Mystical Elf and Giant Soldier of Stone were a lot less useful than Dark Elf since they couldn't be used to attack.
People started to identify, like, they started min-maxing. If you want to summon a
Gotta
level 4 monster, it has to have 1800 attack, or else it's worthless.
This set also included plenty of good effect monsters, and most of them followed the same design philosophy as the ones in Legend of Blue Eyes in both starter decks. A lot of them could be split into groups based on what they were designed to do, and in most cases this was to manipulate and control resources, but unlike their predecessors, these new cards didn't always do so by removing cards from the field. Magician of Faith and Mask of Darkness, for example, allowed the player to recycle magic and trap cards respectively. Equal as these two may seem, Magician of Faith was definitely the better card
Magician of
here.
Faith
Since magic cards can be
awesome.
activated immediately, recycling them is a lot more effective than recycling trap cards is. Also, at this point, magic cards were just generally better than traps anyway, and most of the good ones were limited to 1 copy per deck. Because of all of this, she was good enough to become a metagame staple, and many people chose to play the maximum 3 copies of her in their deck. While we're on the subject of spellcaster type effect monsters, there was another really good one released in this set. Shi and Sengen mostly did the same thing. They could search the player's deck for pretty much any monster they wanted, so long as that monster had less than 1500 attack points in Sengen's case, or less than 1500 defense points in Witch's case. Even though the card pool was very small at this point, these two had a vast range of search targets. They could even search for each other, and triggering their effects wasn't difficult at all. None of the other effect monsters released in this set were anywhere close to as popular as Sengen, Witch, or Magician of Faith, but there were still a handful worth mentioning. Crass Clown and Dream Clown saw occasional occasional success as the focus of the brand new Clown Control deck.
Where you're actually trying to kind of protect your clowns and switch them back and forth from defense, attack, and pop things while also using resource cards like Sanganon, which I believe that's one of the other decks that pops up during this era.
At the same time, White Magical Hat and Masked Sorcerer laid the foundation for hand control, which was nowhere near as powerful as it would eventually become at this point, but saw light experimentation in a meta that was still mostly dominated by Beatdown and Dragon Rush. The main thing that kept these monsters out of the spotlight was their stats. Unlike most of the other staple effect monsters of the time, these cards didn't do anything upon being sent to the graveyard. In order to get anything out of their effects, players actually needed to keep them on the field, and doing so was pretty difficult when cards like Legend, Dark Elf, and 7-colored Fish were all over the place. The clowns could be protected by cards like Wabaku and Mirror Force, and their effects could be used to get rid of any monsters more powerful than them, but there weren't a lot of ways to reliably trigger White Magical Hat's effect. There were a handful of halfway decent equipped magic cards released in this set that provided monsters with pretty substantial attack point boosts, but none of them were as strong as they needed to be to turn White Magical Hat into an actual threat.
There wasn't enough to really buff him up yet. You don't have actually to spare, but like people do start to get the idea that like if I can do that, it's great.
The best magic card in the set without a doubt was Heavy Storm. This card is Dark Hole but for magic and trap cards, and it was invaluable for dealing with problematic pieces of disruption like Trap Hole and Mirror Force.
Heavy Storm taught people how to be conservative.
It ended up making it to where you just can't set infinite back row. It's like you always have to fear and respect Storm.
Because while Heavy Storm was in the format, if you went like set 5 pass, Heavy Storm was going to literally just obliterate you.
As with the previous batch of cards, many of these new cards were strong enough that it called for an update to the ban list. In July 2002, just 1 month following the set's release, Mirror Force was limited, and Sangan, Witch of the Black Forest, and Heavy Storm were all semi-limited. As was the case before, most decks were largely composed of a bunch of the same good staples, and only really diverged when it came to a handful of individual cards. That said, Beatdown and Dragon Rush were still different enough that they were given different names, and both were still all over the place. There was now an even more noticeable slant in favor of Beatdown as the consistency gap between these decks had grown wider. Witch of the Black Forest could grab Summon Skull straight from the deck, and Magic Jammer could negate the Flute of Summoning Dragon. Now that Mirror Force was also a part of the equation, actually keeping a Blue Eyes on the field was slightly more challenging, and while this applied to Beatdown players as well, it was a far less serious problem for them due to how much easier it was for them to summon their boss monster. Dragon Rush players could still take advantage of the new search network by using either Sangan or Witch to retrieve Lord of D, but this was only helpful if they had both the Flute of Summoning Dragon and one or more dragon monsters to summon with it already in their hand. Another big way this format differed from the last was in the availability of staple cards. Most of the good stuff released before Metal Raiders was included in one of the two structure decks, the only exceptions being Raigeki and Pot of Greed. Both of these cards were also pretty affordable, especially when compared to Mirror Force and Magic Jammer, which demanded a much heftier price. Other cards like Heavy Storm and 7 Tools were also somewhat pricey, so this time around, many of the format's best cards didn't see as much play as they otherwise would have, solely due to how expensive they were on the secondary market. And as bad as this may have seemed at the time, this problem was about to get a lot worse. In the months following the release of Metal Raiders, Yu-Gi-Oh's competitive scene began to pick up steam. There were no high-profile tournaments to speak of yet, but sanctioned events were hosted locally and regularly at game stores all over the world. Perhaps to incentivize players to attend these events, licensed tournament stores were given tournament packs, unique boosters that could only be obtained by participating in an official tournament. The first tournament pack entered circulation on September 1st, and it introduced 30 new cards to the game. Most
of these cards are pretty interesting. Alright. I got some cool cards.
of these new cards weren't any good. As a matter of fact, all of them were pretty awful, except for one.
Mechanical Chaser?
If you played Yu-Gi-Oh back in the day, you understand Mechanical Chaser's legacy.
1850. The one card to beat Legend
One card I could beat Legend, but
by 50
still
points.
bad.
And for the longest time, that mattered a lot.
Up until this point, the player base may have taken for granted how accessible the game's best monsters had been. 7-colored Fish and Legend were anything but expensive, even though the metagame had practically been constructed around them. Of course, this was only true because they were easy to get a hold of, and Mechanical Chaser quickly proved that.
But the thing is, no one could really get their hands on this card because it was a tournament pack card.
Tournament packs only came with 3 cards per pack
so
instead of
you
the
are
usual
the
9,
same
and they were
duck
also
that
less
beat
likely
me.
to contain foil cards.
Jeez,
To put
boy.
things into perspective, Axe Raider is a card that would have been outdated by the time the first starter decks came out, but because of how rare it was more expensive than...
Wow. I'm learning about the complete meta of Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now it's pretty base, no secret rare cards, but this is a super rare.
Many of the best cards in the game.
Axe Raider was a really expensive card when it first came out.
Mechanical Chaser, on the other hand, was actually really good, and it was even more rare than Axe Raider was.
$200.
As minor as the attack difference may seem, Mech Chaser was essentially a better version of a card that had been the bread and butter of competitive play all the way up until its release. It was bound to have a noticeable effect on the game. However, seeing as each copy of the card was worth $200, it was pretty rare to run into somebody who played one, much less three of it in their deck. The advantage that these few players had over the rest of the player base was pretty substantial, though.
It was just a landslide. So I have this guy from my locals named Kyle Miller, and he got a hold of 3 mechanical chasers. Kyle started to go over to these 50, 60-man tournaments, taking down like
Can't
every
really
single
hear you
one.
over the video. I feel like the video is already low enough. Hold on. Is this better? Is this better? I can't tell. Usually, my audio is already different. But I'm already at 77 gains. If I'm not mistaken, that should be high enough. Over the video. I think I'll just put it at 0.8 and the video at 5. Hopefully that'll work. Or not. I'm usually not known.
Full boxes, and Billy only
Yes.
remembers
Alright.
the frustration
Nice.
of running into Mech Chaser time and time again, and it just being this
Mech
money
chasers
wall.
are always funny. Money wall. It's basically the first paywall. Magic Ruler.
2
Yes,
weeks
this
after
is
the
the
release of the
one.
first tournament pack, Magic Ruler made its
Magic
return.
Ruler is my
While
favorite
Metal Raiders
box
did
next
much
to
to
Metal
expand
Raiders.
its pool of
This
viable trap
one's the
cards.
goat.
As its name implies, this set was heavily focused on Magic cards.
Yeah. Confiscation. A lot of best cards.
Magic themed booster set
A
may
lot
have
of
seemed like a bad idea at the time, since for
best
it to be any
cards.
good, it would have to include at least a few Magic cards as strong as the Power 5. Against all odds, Magic Ruler actually pulled this off by introducing 5 Power Play Magic cards of its own. The 3 most famous cards in the set, Confiscation, Delinquent Duo, and the Forceful Sentry, all allowed the player to remove cards from their opponent's hand.
Delinquent Duo.
was technically
Delinquent Duo is the
since it
best.
discarded
Even though you
2
have to
cards at the
pay
same
life
time.
points, it
Delinquent
doesn't
Duo,
matter.
I don't
You
know who
screw
in
over
testing
your
thought that card was
you
okay.
screw over your team.
Was such
Like you screw over like these 2 little gremlins. They screw you over twice. One is to choose what card and put in the grave, and the other one you have to choose.
a degenerate card.
so
Rather than
That
just playing your
that's
own
always
game,
a
you're just
glad. I'm
you have to lose
glad
people.
it's
You have to
always
lose
there.
2 cards right away, so your starting hand is now 3 cards.
But the others had the advantage of letting the player choose which card they wanted to get
Confiscation.
rid of.
I'm just gonna look at your hand
Alright.
and get rid of your card.
Confiscation, even though it only rips 1, the hand knowledge that you get from your opponent
hand
is almost
knowledge.
better than ripping out a card with Delinquent Duo. So, like, that's a debate that's been going on forever.
At this point, life points is starting to matter less
Life
and less.
points?
And people are
Yeah.
realizing that, hey, control is probably the way to go. As long as you have at least
Controlling
1 life point
your
left, you don't
opponent
lose. And that's like what
It's
Magic
like
Ruler
the
really pushed,
full
where they
meta
confiscate
reason
a lot of
why
these cards. They
some
have
cards are busted.
Painful Choice was a few years ahead of its time, but it was by
And
no
then
means
there's
bad because of
Painful
this.
Choice.
It could turn itself into any one of the 5 best cards left in the player's
is
deck, and with the help of
fucking
already
amazing.
popular cards like Monster Reborn and Magician of Faith, it could give them access to 2 or even 3 of the 5 cards.
If you have
Crazy.
5 ideal targets to put into your hand, you can just put out all 5.
Choice really doesn't take its own toll towards chaos, I want to say. But right now, people are trying to figure out, can I use it with Magician of Faith and make it worth it?
Finally, there was Snatch Steal. Unlike most equipped cards, Snatch Steal didn't do anything to beef up the monsters of the person
Snatch
playing.
Steal.
It was actually
One of
meant
my
to be equipped to
favorites.
an opponent's monster, at which point control of the equipped monster would change. Though Snatch Steal was certainly the best equipped card in the set, it wasn't the only good one. Magic Ruler included a handful of others, and among them the best was Axe of Despair. Simply put, this was as good as it got in terms of cards that boosted attack points, and unlike Stimpack, it didn't have any glaring drawbacks. This set's
Yeah.
contributions extend beyond the individual cards it added, as it also introduced 3 new kinds of Magic cards to the
The
game. Quick Play cards
ritual-
are a sort of hybrid.
The ritual spell cards. One of the most busted cards I've ever seen in my life. Only for relinquished. Yes, Yugi boy. Or Seize boy. Relinquish shall take over your monsters if I had any relinquishers. Anyways, quick play and continuous are
From trap cards and
obviously
magic cards.
better,
They can be activated from
but
the hand just like
I
regular
prefer
magic
rituals.
cards, but if they are set face
They're
down,
kinda
then they
cool.
can be
They're
activated during
pretty
either
neat.
player's turn, just like
They're
trap cards
neat.
can. Magic Ruler included 4 of these, but only 2 saw any actual success. Rush Recklessly was like reinforcements, but better in every way. It didn't need to be set before being used, and it also
And
offered a
then
bigger
you
attack
got
boost. It wasn't
those
as strong as Axe of
people.
Despair, but it was far more
And
versatile.
then you
And
got
it wasn't
Axe Despair as an Archfiend Decado. Guess what? You could use Red Dragon Archfiend because it's always treated as an Archfiend Ducado. My monster? What the hell you mean your monster?
susceptible to being destroyed the same way equipped cards were. This was also
Oh, yeah.
fairly important following the
I
release of
take
Magic
your
Ruler, since the
monster.
set also featured Mystical Space Typhoon, a new way for
Mystical
players to
Space
remove threats in
Typhoon.
the back row. While the card lacked the
Best
overwhelming power of Heavy
usage.
Storm, like Fissure,
Then
it
there's
was a
Heavy
much-needed
Storm.
alternative to a
It's
map
used.
removal card that many players ran as
This
many copies of as they
MST
could.
just
Spell and trap
makes it
destruction back in the early days
better.
of Yu-Gi-Oh! They viewed it as like, wow, this card is really powerful.
Continuous cards are exactly
Continuous.
what they sound like. They stay on the field after being activated until they're
Classic.
destroyed. There were also 4 of these in Magic
That's
Ruler,
the-
and while none
that's
of them
the type
were
I
enough
hope.
to be staples, 3 of them formed the backbone of the first popular burn deck.
The Toll's the ones that's ruling all.
The goal of a burn deck is to kill the other player through effect damage. This was possible before the release of Magic Ruler thanks to cards like Just Desserts, but it was nowhere near
Just
as practical as it became
Desserts.
with the help of many newly released cards. Depending on what the other person
Toll is my favorite. Pay to declare an attack, and then you just mirror force them, and you just it just makes me happy.
was playing,
This one's
Messenger of
cool,
Peace
but
had the potential to be
I
a
don't feel
strictly
it.
more powerful version of Swords of
Monsters.
Revealing Light. Though it couldn't stop the other player from attacking with weaker monsters like Sengen, it was perfectly capable of keeping the game's most powerful monsters at bay. And this was important as it meant that anyone who played it had significantly more time to accrue resources
Alright.
that they could use to burn
Not
through
bad.
their opponent's life points. Cards like Ukazi and Just Desserts were obviously effective enough at this, but they couldn't hold a candle to Toll and Chain Energy.
So for those of you that don't know, for Chain Energy,
What
either
the
player
hell am I
what they
looking
want
at?
to play. It's gonna have to pay
What the fuck am I looking at? Oh my
1,000 life
god.
points to normal summon, special summon, set, or
Yeah,
activate
Mirror Force.
cards
Hee.
from his or her respective hand.
Oh my god.
Oh boy, our opponent drew Toll. So each player is gonna have to pay 500 life points to advance on that game state. What a combo! Enjoy.
What a
Only playing 5
damn
cards, by the way. This
usage.
is really edgy game state. Like, holy shit. This might go to deck out.
The set's most interesting additions to the card pool were ritual cards. Ritual monsters were
Ritual.
a brand new kind of monster that could not be normal
Yes,
summoned
the
and instead had to be
ritual
special summoned
cards.
through the use of ritual
Yes.
magic cards. While this was cool in theory, in
You're feeling a
practice,
bit
the ritual summoning mechanic was
eerie,
completely flawed. Most of
Seize
them had no
boy.
effect, and to summon them a player needed
hell am I
a lot of
looking at?
resources
These are not
readily
relinquished.
available.
Like rituals, just mechanically, and this is like before we got a lot of the stuff we have now. But like, it's a 3-card investment. Well, technically 2 because you keep the ritual monster, but you need to specifically have your ritual monster, your ritual
That is
spell, and then a monster to use as tribute for the ritual spell. So you use the ritual spell and the monsters. You neg 2 to summon the monster.
This created numerous issues with consistency, as oftentimes a player would have one or the other but not both. Then, on top of that, the player needed to tribute other
need
monsters as
that
part of the
much?
process, all to summon a
Like,
card that
that
offered nothing
sucks.
but an okay stat line.
And it's like, this is all you're getting for your cards? It was just, yeah.
The
Wow.
only exception was Relinquished, who actually had an extraordinary
Yes, relinquished. You feeling lucky, Seize boy? Cause I'll tell you what, if I had relinquished in my luck deck, it would have been over for you. It would have been over for you. You would have been done for. Relinquished. Because it's only 1 star, and you can control your monsters.
fairly powerful effect. It was also by a
Hell
wide margin
yeah.
the first level ritual monster in the game, which also meant that it was the easiest to summon. These things weren't enough to completely make up for the previously mentioned issues with ritual summoning, but it
Best
brought enough to the table that it was
card.
occasionally played. Only in decks built specifically to take advantage of it, however. Speaking of monsters, despite the set's theme,
Wow,
there were
that was a
actually
long
more monsters
intermission.
and magic cards in it, but only a handful
Anyways,
of them made their
we
way
got
into the meta.
Mahavelo,
Many of the
a
monsters
little
in the set followed in
peacock.
the footsteps of
Okay.
Sanguine Witch by offering players
Some
resources
more.
upon being sent to the graveyard.
Yeah.
There were 6 different monsters that could all, upon being destroyed by battle, summon any monster of a specific
Interesting.
attribute straight from the deck as long as the monster
Alright,
had
Flying Kamakiri. This is my favorite one. Flying Kamakiri. Card destroyed.
1500 or less attack.
Wind
Theoretically,
monster.
This was even better than what Sanguine Witch offered, since these effects summoned their targets instead of just adding them to the hand, but the many stipulations attached to the process kept most of these cards out of the competitive discourse. Mystic Tomato stood out from the rest, however, and almost immediately saw moderate success,
Mystic
since its ability to summon
Tomato.
dark monsters made it a direct
Mystic
pipeline to many of the player's most
Tomato.
powerful tools. Nimble Momonga and Giant Germ did something similar.
My Nimble Manga! Nimble Manga! This is my favorite card. Next to Giant Germ. This one's the best one.
But where
Because it gives you 1,000 life points, while this one just gives you, inflicts you 500. A big bug. Yes, a
initially
big
not quite
bug.
as popular. Unlike
Bigger
the
bug.
elemental recruiters, these cards only let players summon extra copies of themselves instead of picking whatever card they wanted, but in exchange, the player was allowed to summon up to 2 monsters at once instead of just 1. Since Momonga summoned itself in defense position and also caused a bigger net swing in life points upon being destroyed, it was more popular than Giant Germ, but both were mostly ignored in favor of Mystic Tomato for quite some time. Momonga was certainly present in the metagame following Magic Ruler's release, but it wouldn't truly catch on until much
I
later.
love
I
Nimble Manga.
I played it automatically.
Hell yeah.
Actually, like, I caught on to it somewhat early.
One thing people don't like is that you could draw 2. This is one of the first cards people start this guy. Well, you don't want to draw 2 of these.
None of these monsters could compare to Cyberjar, though. Upon being flipped face up, it could
Ah, the first jars, the first of many jars. Cyber jars, well good. I prefer my dice jar.
wipe out an entire board and then give both players 5 cards split between their hand and field.
Cyberjar is freaking crazy.
I love the card, but it was really a double-edged sword. Like giving your opponent 5 cards, giving yourself 5 cards, blowing up the entire field.
Cyberjar to me is such a Yu-Gi-Oh card. Like, it is one of the most high variance, ridiculous effects
W
I've
Nimble
ever
Manga.
seen in my
Of
life.
course it
Like,
is, Seas. Of
it's
course
just
it
like,
is,
there's no other way
Duck
to put it. This
Boy.
card could not exist in any other card game.
Of course it is, the Duck Boy.
On October 1st, 2 weeks after the release of Magic Ruler, the Forbidden Unlimited list received another update, which limited Cyberjar, all of the hand control cards, Painful Choice, Snatch Steal, and a 7th card named Upstart Goblin that had yet to receive much attention. The player base wasn't given any time to adapt to these changes before the next major shift in the meta, however, as this ban list update happened on the same day as the release of the second tournament pack.
Morphing Jar is such a good card.
Morphing Jar was really the only good card in the pack, and like Mechanical Chaser before it, it was an ultra rare. Whether it was better than Mechanical Chaser or not in the short term is up for debate, but it was certainly very powerful. Even though it couldn't nuke the board or special summon monsters like Cyberjar could, using it was generally a lot less risky since Cyberjar often left the other player with a lot more to work with. At this point, it was actually the only card in the game that could simultaneously leave the other player with less cards than they started with, while leaving the person
Both jars. I hate them both, but love them both. I don't know why. I prefer dice jar though.
playing it
I
with
still prefer
more
dice
cards
jar.
than they started with.
In terms of like swings of card advantage, Morphing Jar is definitely up there. I think one
But
of the things I
yeah,
like the most
Morphing
about
Jar's
Morphing
cool
Jar
and all, but I
was
prefer
when it comes
I
to the
prefer
more
running my
psychological aspect
dice,
of Yu-Gi-Oh! And
my
bluffing,
luck.
You could just
I prefer
set, like,
doing
let's
my
say,
luck,
a man
man.
in your bug, and just set
Let me
like,
do my
the
luck,
whole hand
man.
of what's actually settable, and your opponent is gonna 90% of the time think you have Morphing Jar and play like you have Morphing Jar, and that way you can basically
Also, my
control
eyes are a
what your
bit
opponent
shallow.
does.
I'm sorry.
If you set everything
Like,
now, it doesn't
it's
signal
shifting
just
a
like,
lot,
I have
but
the things in the gate
I'll
store
work out
now.
with that.
Awesome. Signal,
Magic
I have
Jammer.
Morphing Jar.
You know, other cards
Flip,
don't necessarily create a
discard all
dynamic like that.
cards
A lot
in
of the
your
time,
hand,
cards, you know,
drop
they get
5
played and they do what
respective
they're supposed to do.
decks.
A card like Morphing Jar that does more than what it just says on the card, I think
It's
always
basically
just sets a
dark
very
card
interesting precedent
discard.
for how the game progresses later on.
Like Mechanical
Yes,
Chaser, this
brother,
one
we
probably would've been
gambling in
stable if
here.
It was more accessible, but because of how
Yes,
expensive
we
it
gamble.
was just too difficult
We be
for
doing
the average
gambles.
player to get a hold of for it to have even a somewhat widespread presence in the early metagame.
I traded like almost this whole binder for a morphing jar back then.
Back then, we traded a whole binder for him. Pharaoh's Servant. I don't know. Pharaoh's Servant's
The next
fine,
booster set,
but
Pharaoh Servant, hit the scene
not
only 2
many
weeks
to
after
be
the
liked
second
about
tournament pack.
in
Seeing as the
October.
last booster set was only a month old at this point, the metagame was still in the
It's-
process of developing around all the new cards.
Yeah, Magic Ruler really ruled everything, but
Magic Ruler meta, but lately
Pharaoh's
its competition
Servant
had been a lot more
really
rare.
made it
Clown
clear
Control and Dragon Rush managed to
it's
stick around,
kinda
and they'd been joined by Burn, Relinquish,
a
and
lot.
Control decks. Barely
Like,
anyone was sure what the best version of each
Magic
deck was
Rulers,
at the time of Pharaoh
like-
Servant's release, however, and it provided all of them with even more tools to experiment with.
And now
Most
it's
of the good
just
stuff in this set came
66,
from its pool of
17
magic and trap
rares,
cards, but that
10
isn't to
super
say it
rares,
didn't have
ultra
any good
rares.
monsters. Goblin Attack Force took the idea at the core of cards like Dark Elf.
This money. This is the worst. I keep getting screwed over by this card every single time. Oh my god.
To a brand new extreme.
Like
by
it
being a
should
level
be
4
banned.
monster with 2,300
It
attack
should be.
points. At this point, its value
There's
was
no
debatable,
way
because Dark
you
Elf
should
could
be
still deal
running
with anything that
Goblin
this thing
Attack
was meant to
Force.
deal with, except for another newcomer from Pharaoh Servant.
I
named
swear,
the Fiend Mega Cyber.
it's-
This card was notable for being one of the first
And
monsters
the Fiend Mega Cyber. If your opponent controls 2, you can at least special summon.
in the game.
This is
that
the
could
best
essentially
one
special
out of.
summon itself for free.
I
Monsters
love
started to see
Mega
things shifting as
Fiend
well. We had
Cyber
stuff like
shit.
Goblin Attack Force. Like monsters were getting stronger and easier to summon.
Neither card attains staple
Like the Fiend Mega Cyber is oftenly the coolest.
status, but
Sorry about that. Back to our viewing experience.
both of them fit like a glove. In particular,
So
like
yeah,
versus
basically,
Goblin strategy.
as
Even
you may
outside
know,
these decks, Goblin Attack
a
Force
lot of
specifically
things
was
happen.
fairly popular due to its sheer attack power.
You don't really need to attack with Goblin Attack Force. You can always
Goblin
sit on
Attack
like
Force,
a very
again,
aggressive wall.
kind of the worst.
This set also introduced a new member of the Jar series of flip monsters. Like Morphing Jar and Cyber Jar before it, Morphing Jar 2 was a complete blowout whenever
Really,
its effect was
really
on. Its
shows
power ceiling
what it
wasn't
needs
quite
to
as
be.
outrageous as its predecessors, but unlike both of them, it could effectively end the battle phase since it got rid of all attack position monsters on the field, and all the monsters that replaced them had to be set face down.
Morphing Jar 2 was the most annoying card combined with Morphing Jar 1. The thing is, Morphing Jar 2 could summon out just more Morphing Jar 2 over and over and over again to mill out someone's entire deck.
By this point, a lot of players had cut many of the low-level monsters that dominated the early game in favor of newer alternatives, but there still weren't any alternatives to the best of the original high-level monsters. This would change following the release of Pharaoh Servant.
I summon the fighting Jesus.
Jinzo almost immediately replaced Summon Skull as the best boss monster in the game. While its attack stat wasn't quite as high,
Jinzo! Jinzo.
but there still weren't any
Jinzo.
alternatives to the
Jinzo.
best
Jinzo.
field
Fuck yeah,
high
Jinzo.
level
Fuck yeah,
monsters.
Jinzo.
This would
Jinzo.
change
Fuck yeah,
following
Jinzo.
the release of Pharaoh Serpent.
Oh, Jinzo. Jinzo. Y'all have no idea. Jinzo's the fucking goat. He's truly the fucking goat. Like, straight up. Straight up. He's the fucking goat. Like, imagine getting fucked over by Jinzo, the ultimate god of despair. Negate all face-up trap cards on the field. This brother, the ultimate.
Jinzo almost immediately replaced Summon Skull as the best boss monster in the game. While its attack stat wasn't quite as high, this was hardly a problem thanks to its powerful effect.
Cannot be activated.
Trap Hole, Wabaku, and Mirror Force had always been pretty
Y'all
annoying
really
pieces of
said,
disruption that made it really
let's
difficult
make
to
it
reliably
so that
create
you
summon
cannot
monsters.
use Mirror Force, no magic cylinder, no traps, no nothing, no traps, no craps, no coconuts, no crooks and knacks. You just full on destroy.
This made choosing to summon him a lot safer than doing the same with other high-level monsters, which many players agreed was much more valuable than 100 extra
Love it,
attack points.
allow it, bruv.
Jinzo was probably the most impactful card in that set at the time, just because it
Allow
really
it,
changed the dynamic
allow
with
it,
trap
bruv.
cards, and with cards
Like,
like
allow
Mirror
it,
Force,
allow
yes,
it.
it was 100 attack less than a Summon Skull, but like, I mean, the payoff of not having to worry about anything in your opponent's back row, like, that was just monumental.
Thank you, Jinzo. Negate
Servant
all
also
magic.
introduced the ultimate foil to Jinzo, a continuous trap card.
Fucking awesome.
This was, without question, the single best trap card released up to this point, even eclipsing Mirror Force in terms of potential impact.
Order was frustrating all the way through Chaos, man. Your power cards are so many spells.
Magic cards were still the strongest type of card in the game, just like they always had been, so the ability to deny another player access to them altogether was obviously very useful. Since it was a trap card, Order could also be activated in response to magic cards, allowing it to act as a sort of pseudo-magic jammer. Its optional maintenance cost also meant that, on top of everything else, the person playing it could get rid of it whenever they felt
truly
like it by simply choosing
the
to pay for
best.
it.
Imperial Order, like right now, of course, we got
Like,
the Pure Rad, so we
holy,
can't turn it off
y'all
manually.
cannot
Back then, it was
believe
just a free
what can be
spell
truly
negation. You had, like,
gained
Solve
upon
Judgment, Magic Jammer,
this
but
dang
Imperial
dick,
Order was like, you just
this
activate
cause
something,
of
it's got a free
legend.
negation, and you don't keep it.
Yeah, like, you could choose when to turn it off, and that's what made it so powerful. The fact that now
But
you
turn it
can't
off?
is, I honestly think they should have made it that way in the first place, because it would have been a stronger
Gotta be
balancing
honest,
mechanism. Even to
that's
this
kinda
day,
different.
Imperial Order is still played, because spell cards are one of,
Interesting.
if not like just the most powerful card type, because of just how much they allow you to do. And Imperial Order being just one of the biggest roadblocks in wanting to play spell cards, it's legendary.
Jinzo was one of the only ways to deal with this card, since Order negated most of the back row removal that existed at this point. As a matter of fact, perhaps as a direct response to Imperial Order, Pharaoh Servant introduced players to Dust Tornado. This was essentially Mystical Space Typhoon in the form of a trap card, which under most circumstances would have made it strictly worse. But the presence of Imperial Order in the metagame made this
Fairly
card
interesting.
since it was, aside from Jinzo, one of the only reliable ways to remove the card from the field.
Dust Tornado. Not bad. Call of the Haunted.
Call of the Haunted was another trap card alternative to a popular magic card, in this case Monster
For the
Reborn. Just like
love
Dust Tornado, it was for the most part worse than its magic card counterpart, but for different reasons. Mystical Space Typhoon was a quick play magic card, so it could already be used during either player's turn. This meant that Dust Tornado didn't really benefit from being a trap card, aside from its utility as a way to destroy Imperial Order.
Frog the
Monster Reborn, on
jam,
the other
frog
hand,
the
was a
jam,
regular magic
frog
card,
the
and thus
jam.
could only be activated during the main phase of the return of its owner. This meant that Call of the Haunted could actually be used in a few interesting ways that Monster Reborn couldn't.
But that Call of the Haunted was also really cool too, because it started changing the game and how people had to think, because it, like, if your opponent had a set card and they were attacking you with their monsters, if there was a monster in the grave they could resurrect and kill you for game, you could lose if that set card was Call of the Haunted, because you could use it like offensively like that, or you could use it defensively to protect yourself from dying, and I think that was pretty cool.
Perhaps in order to compensate for all this added utility, the card was given numerous drawbacks. It could only summon monsters from its owner's graveyard. The monster it summoned had to be in attack position, and if it left the field for any reason, the monster it summoned would be destroyed. These came on top of the fact that it couldn't be used immediately like Monster Reborn could, being a trap card and all, so even considering all of its unique benefits, it was a pretty substantial downgrade. That said, Monster Reborn's effect was still really powerful.
Monster Reborn still good, but Call of the Haunted really pulls up.
Strangely, the set featured a second alternative to Monster Reborn as well, except this one was also a magic card. Premature Burial carried with it all of the same stipulations as Call of the Haunted did, with the only exception, of course, being that it didn't have to be set for a turn before being used. Now, in exchange, it was given an additional life point cost on top of everything else, but just like with Call of the Haunted, none of this was enough to dissuade players from using it. Monster Reborn's effect was, again, really good, and there were plenty of people who were more than willing to make these kinds of concessions if it meant that they could essentially run extra copies of it in their deck. The only other magic card in the set whose immediate
like Premature Burial.
comparable to Premature Burials was Nobleman of
That's
Cross.
nice.
This card brought an idea to the forefront of competitive
Cross
play
out
that had already been
Nobleman.
introduced but had yet to truly catch on.
It removed from play.
Instead of simply sending certain cards to the graveyard, some cards forced others to be removed from the game entirely, and this was the first high-profile card designed to do that. While this alone would have been enough to set the card apart from other one-for-one removal cards like Fissure and Mystical Space Typhoon, it took things a step further by removing from play all copies of its target from both players' decks. This card was extremely useful given the growing power and popularity of flip monsters, and was one of the only ways aside from Raigeki
Honestly,
and Dark Hole to deal with them.
Yeah,
it's a wrap.
Cross Out definitely changed the dynamic of
Like,
flip
honestly,
effect
it's
monsters,
wraps
which, as
for
we said,
y'all.
there's, you know,
If this
Cyber
card just
Jug,
shows up,
Man-Eater
it's
Bug,
all over.
Morphing
It's
Jar
all
came out around this
it's
time.
all
And
over.
for pretty much all future flip effect monsters too,
Like,
and being able to just deal with
fuck,
set monsters.
man.
They don't have to be flip effect monsters, just anything
Like,
your opponent sets,
Cross
the fact
Out
that you just have a single
really
piece of
makes it
removal
all
just to
over.
deal with it.
These 6 cards composed
like
the
the
set's lineup of
many,
competitive
many
staples, but of
negates.
course, they were far from the only new cards
The
for
Furious
cinematic success.
6.
Magic Drain and
The
Mirror
Sentinel
Wall were
6.
decent and cheap
There's also
alternatives to
Mirror
Magic Hammer
and
Mirror Force,
Magic
respectively.
Drain,
Magic
but
Drain allowed players to ignore Magic Jammer's discard cost, and Mirror Wall had the
Interesting.
benefit of not being on the limited list. Ceasefire was a borderline
Ceasefire.
staple card that, while certainly
Interesting
popular,
one too.
was almost exclusively played
Many
in the side
things.
deck. It made dealing with flip monsters a lot easier,
It's
and
a
it
lot
also
easier
provided
for
a
you to
power
just
boost to burn decks. As a matter of fact, this
fight.
set did quite a bit to power up both burn and hand
It's
control.
quite
Skull
interesting
Invitation, Burning Land,
on
Minor
how
Goblin
you
Official,
fight
Hacker
within.
Seed, and Type 0 Magic Crusher all had burn effects, and Gravity Bind
Type-0 and Gravity
could be
Bind.
used to keep the player safe from potential attacks. These were by no means game-defining or even definitive for burn decks, but they all saw at least minor experimentation. Hand control, meanwhile, was given Time Seal and Light Force Sword, 2 cards that helped slowly but surely whittle down the resources in another player's hand. The set also featured limiter removal, which was most
Limiter
useful to players who already had 2
removal.
of the most expensive cards in the game, Jinzo
Machine
and
type.
Mechanical Chaser.
So,
This card was
Jinzo.
one of the first enablers of a
Oh.
reliable one-turn kill, and was really effective because it was often used in conjunction with Jinzo. The ban list in December put
Jinzo
many of
with
these
limiter
powerful cards in
removal.
check, and even changed the placements of some previously released cards like Witch of the Black Forest. Surprisingly though, given how quickly Pharaoh's Servant had come out following Magic Ruler, the next major shift in the metagame wouldn't happen until March of the following year, when the game would take its furthest leap forward in power yet. On March 1st,
Sorry about that. I had to do something. Give me a second. Right. Sorry. Anyways.
Yu-Gi-Oh! Players saw the release of 2 new booster packs, Labyrinth of Nightmare and the
Anyways,
much less impactful Tournament
Labyrinth of
3.
Nightmares and the
Tournament
third
Pack 3
season of
made
Tournament
a big
Packs.
deal, since Mechanical Chaser was reprinted in it
Mechanical
as a formal
Chasers.
physical super rare, but it just so happened
It's over
that
for you.
Labyrinth of Nightmare made the card irrelevant with
The
not just
Labyrinth.
one, but 2 new monsters.
Not to be confused with the Labyrinth archetype. You got women. You got monkey. You got. You got whatever the hell.
Gemini Elf was a strict upgrade in terms of attack points, and so it became the new face of powerful level 4 monsters.
Gemini Elf, like, you know, we have Mechanical Chaser beat now, hooray!
The other card, Bazoo the Soul Eater, was a bit more interesting. Bazoo's effect let a player remove up to 3 cards in their graveyard from play, and its attack would go up by 300 points for each. The card was supposed to specify monsters in its effect, but due to a translation error, any cards in the player's graveyard could be used. This made it very easy to crank Bazoo up to 2,500 attack points, and if the player was low on resources, it could still, at the very least, trade blows with a Gemini Elf. Interestingly enough, this set also included a hard counter to Bazoo, Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer. Kaiku wasn't as powerful as Gemini Elf or even Mechanical Chaser, but it was one of the first monsters in the game to have both a high stat value and a powerful effect.
Gemini Elf was like Super Saiyan 2. Everyone can be Super Saiyan now, so all the 1800 beat sticks, they all can gain decent effects now. You got stuff like Kaiku, where it just prevents the graveyard from being manipulated.
Kaiku is a very interesting card because this was like Lajin power creeped like to infinity, you know?
Kaiku could not only get rid of resources from another player's graveyard, but it also had an effect that prevented the opponent from removing cards in the graveyard from play, which by extension
Labyrinth
could
of
stop
Nightmares.
Bazoo from increasing its attack points
Yeah,
in the
not
first
to be
place.
confused with
Speaking
the
of Bazoo,
archetype,
Kaiku also
and
benefited
most of the
from a
time,
similar translation error.
At first, they're mistranslated, and you can remove any card for these cards. So Kaiku could remove any 2 from the graveyard, Bazoo could remove any 3, and the trap card, most importantly called Skull Layer, could remove any cards from the graveyard to pop. So if you go read Skull Layer, it's along the same concept, and you remove from play any number, and instead of monster cards, it's cards. In your graveyard, destroy a face-up monster on the field whose level is equal to the number of cards. So for just 4 cards out of your graveyard, you can go pop any level 4 that's getting summoned.
One more monster of note was Zombira the Dark. In a vacuum, without taking card price and availability into consideration,
Zombira the Dark.
But Gemini Elf was a
Zombira
secret
the
rare,
Dark?
making it very difficult
What
for
the
the
hell
average
is
player to get their
Zombira
hands
the
on 3
Dark?
copies. Zombira, however, was a common, and despite his
I
many
don't know.
restrictions, he could kill 1, potentially even 2 copies of Gemini Elf all by himself.
Interesting tactics. A rip Legion Powercraft to death. Yeah, it was like, yeah, it had to happen. I mean, they had Goblin Attack Force. It had to happen. Like it had to happen
In addition
before.
to being high-tech monsters, this set included 2 extremely powerful equipped cards. Mage Power and United We Stand both boosted the attack and defense of the equipped monster relative to the number of cards the player controlled. They allowed monsters to easily reach some pretty absurd attack values, and they even brought about another offshoot of the basic beatdown strategy focused
Mage
on
Power
Maha
and
monster that
Maha
had been released
Vilo.
all the way back in
Card
Magic.
gain
Many
attack
decks that
for
didn't play
equipped
Maha still
cards.
ran both of these new cards as well, but
Equipped
they weren't
card
staples
again
the same way
500.
any of the 3
Equipped
new
card again
monsters were.
Mage
800.
Power and United We Stand, like you said, it's like the
United
first
We
like
Stand.
genuinely good equipped spells just because of like it seems
Something
silly that these cards
interesting.
used to be good, but like if you go like summon monster set 4 Mage Power, that monster has like
Crispling.
2,500 extra attacks. So just the power
I'ma
scale of
be
how big a
straight.
monster could get would just be absurd.
Most of the new trap
I'ma be
cards were either
straight up
niche or
honest.
subpar, but one was good enough to join the other staples like Imperial Order and Mirror Force. Torrential Tribute was like a combination of Trap Hole and Dark Hole, and because of its reactive
Torrential
nature, one could argue that
Tribute.
it was even better than Dark Hole was.
But
Honestly,
Torrential
kinda
is probably
neat.
the most impactful card long-term from this set.
Torrential Tribute,
Everything gets destroyed.
a board wipe that you could flip on your opponent's turn. It wasn't even, they didn't even have to attack. It could just be on summon.
People are smart about it. They use their Sangans
One
to toggle
monster
stuff.
summon, destroy all
People
monsters
had
on
to
the
learn how to play
field.
around that card. again, it kind of created the heavy storm dynamic where you had to be more conservative in thinking and respect your opponent's back row, because it's like, if they have torrential, I might just lose the game. So a lot of times you might see older Yu-Gi-Oh players not playing into it by overcommitting to their board and summoning a second monster. They might just poke with like whatever monster they have on the field, because if they have the possibility of not running into torrential,
yes,
torrential
tributation.
Players to be very
Some
conservative.
interesting
Jar of
cards.
Greed and Magic Cylinder
Ah,
saw
there we go.
occasional
Jar of
play as well,
Greed
but
and
I
Magic
became close to
Cylinder.
offering the power of torrential
The
tribute.
two
What
goats.
really pushed this month
I'll
over
say
the edge
Magic
was the
Cylinder I
simultaneous
run
release
on
of
my
Starter
OCG
Joey
deck.
and Starter Deck Pegasus on March 30th. Though many of the best
Pegasus.
cards in both decks were just reprints from older sets, they each
Ah,
included one of
yes.
the best cards in the
The
game.
Pegasus deck. The Pegasus starter deck. And also some scapegoats! Harpy Feather Duster. The goat. Scapegoat is
Scapegoat
really
and
the goat.
Graceful Charity were both better than any of the Magic cards in Labyrinth of Nightmare. While there was some debate about whether Scapegoat belonged in the main deck or the side deck, and some people opted not to play it at all, it certainly had a noteworthy metagame presence, probably enough to warrant being called a staple. Even though the tokens it generated couldn't really
the
be used
pure
for anything,
power,
at least not
the
yet.
pure
This kind
dark
of defensive power
wisdom.
was almost unprecedented. Unlike Swords of Revealing Light, this card didn't need to be activated preemptively and could be used to intercept incoming attacks. Not to mention, it also wasn't vulnerable to magic and trap card destruction. Now all that said, as you may expect, Graceful Charity was definitely the better card here. You would have been hard-pressed to find anyone who wasn't running it in their main deck, and it isn't very hard to see why.
Graceful Charity, this should have been banned before it even was legal, but
You draw 3 and you discard 2.
It more or less did the same thing as Pot of Greed, and while it wasn't necessarily better, it also wasn't necessarily worse. It could be either or depending on the situation, and the discard cost, while usually a drawback, allowed players to do a lot of things that Pot of Greed didn't.
let's say you drew like Monster Reborn off Graceful Charity, but then you could like discard the Jinzo in your hand and Monster Reborn the Jinzo. Like, that's so powerful. And just for simplified Yu-Gi-Oh back then, it was just taking the game to a completely another level.
And as if these cards hadn't already done enough for the game, just a little over a week later, Stairway to the Destined Duel shook things up again by introducing 2 more staples to the card pool. Each copy of the game included a promotional pack, and all of these packs contained the same 3 cards. One of them was nothing more than a collectible for fans of the anime, but the other 2 seemed like they were tailor-made for competitive play. Harpy's Feather Duster more or less speaks for itself. This was the Raigeki to Heavy Storm's Dark Hole.
The
It was just as popular as you would expect.
Feather
Sinister Serpent, on the other
Duster.
hand, was powerful in a way that wasn't quite as obvious. At first glance, it doesn't really appear to do anything, but as it turns out, there were actually a lot of very easy and useful ways to take advantage of its effect.
You essentially created infinite discard fodder for you. So, just as an example, if you did decide to play cards like, let's say, Magic Jammer, or just any good discard card, Graceful Charity would probably be a better example here. It's a card that you choose to play in your deck that you know technically doesn't do anything, but if you ever have it in tandem with these other cards that require you to discard, whether for cost or as part of the effect, you aren't losing any card advantage as a result of that. And the funny thing is, in a very simplified game state, you could effectively just keep setting Sinister Serpent over and over again, so you never technically lose a monster while you're drawing cards off the top of your deck each turn. So it was this really weird card, but it actually just made a tremendous impact on the game.
As usual, most of the best new cards made their way onto the limited list. Between the 2 updates released in April and May, 9 total changes were made. Graceful Charity was the only semi-limited card, while
I'ma
Magic
be
Cylinder,
honest.
Sinister Serpent, Harpy's Feather Duster,
I have
and
nothing
2
else
new
to
equipped
say.
spells
I'm
were all
just
limited.
reacting
Sengen and
to
Heavy
this.
Storm
I'm
made
just
their way to
watching the
limited
video,
section
man.
as
There's
well. In
nothing
Sengen's
else to
case,
talk
because
about.
he, like Witch of the Black
Like,
Forest, continued to get better
Sengen's
every
limited
time
to
new
2?
monsters were released.
They just like they
the
power
little
crept
cookie
themselves
guy.
as more good stuff came out.
And in
Still
Heavy
funny
Storm's
little
case,
guy.
because Harpy's
Still a
Feather Duster
funny little
did
guy.
the same thing it
He's
did.
a
By this point, it was
funny
pretty
little
clear that
guy.
Yu-Gi-Oh was a much different game than it had been a year prior, but one thing hadn't changed, and that was that Beatdown was still the best deck around. Despite how many challengers had attempted to take its place, this was still the most popular and most powerful deck in the game, just like it had been back in May of 2002. The deck was a sort of ship of Theseus, though. It's hard to say whether or not it was the same deck it used to be, since pretty much all of the original pieces had been swapped out for new ones. At this point, the deck was certainly more control-focused, especially when compared to truly dedicated versions of the Beatdown strategy, but it still aimed to do the same thing, overwhelm the opponent with powerful monsters while using other tools like magic cards, trap cards, and effect monsters to control the game. It's also worth pointing out that even with mechanical chaser out of
Alright,
the picture,
that
there
is
were
a
still
lot of
plenty
great
expensive
cards.
staple cards that a lot of players
What do you mean, Jinzo 60? Jinzo $60? How's that possible? There's no goddamn way. And morphing jars that much? Jesus
I
Christ.
couldn't or didn't feel like paying for. This obviously affected deck building since it forced people to find alternatives to anything they didn't have, which allowed a lot of cards to continue seeing play that otherwise wouldn't have. Speaking purely in terms of optimization though, there really was no reason to play most of the stuff that had defined the early game, and surprisingly, the same was soon to be true of the beatdown deck itself. One of the deck's oldest rivals, Hand Control, was about to be powered up substantially by the release of Legacy of Darkness in June and Pharaonic Guardian in July. These two sets changed the game in plenty of ways, and one of the most notable ways they did is by giving Hand Control a bunch of new tools.
Really goddamn good. Oh yeah, Yatagarasu. Gonzalug was bad. Spirit Reaper's not bad.
Legacy of Darkness had Yatagarasu and Drop-Off, and Pharaonic Guardian had Spirit Reaper and Donzalug.
Interesting.
What was perhaps the most surprising about these four cards is just how good they actually wound up being. None of them were all too different from White Magical Hat after all, and if that card hadn't pushed Hand Control over the edge, well, it was hard to see why these would. Donzalug in particular was almost identical, but despite this, it was arguably the most important piece of support the deck received in either set. There were a handful of different reasons for this, but more than anything else, the card owed a lot of its success to Mystic
better
Tomato,
in the anime.
which had an extremely strong metagame presence at the time. Tomato had always been fairly popular following its debut
great
in Magic,
divisions.
but now that Sengen and Witch were both limited, it was seeing an
power,
unprecedented level of representation.
They're all
the fact
limited.
that everybody could only play one
But
Witch
then you
and
got
one
Mystic
Sengen meant
Tomato.
two things. First, that they showed up in the hand a lot less frequently, and second, that using one to search for the other was a much bigger commitment now that players had no extra copies to fall back on. Mystic Tomato did a lot to minimize both issues by providing consistent access to both monsters and letting players pick which one they wanted to summon based on what monsters they wanted to search for. Anyone who was already playing Mystic Tomato for this reason didn't have to go out of their way to include Donzalug in their deck, since he was also a dark monster with 1500 or less attack. This was one advantage he had over White Magical Hat, the other being his higher attack point score. One of Hat's most glaring weaknesses was the fact that it could be killed by pretty much any non-flip monster in the game. While
Sorry, Magical White Hat, you've been
Sengen and Witch
dethroned.
couldn't kill it, and it could at least trade with an attack position Mystic Tomato. Together, these two things meant that he was safer and more convenient to summon and easier to keep alive than Magical Hat was, which of course also meant that resolving his effect was a lot easier.
And
All
the
of these things
Zalug
also
squad.
applied to Spirit Reaper. While this
And
monster
then there's
couldn't
Spirit
attack over really any
Destroyed by
meta-relevant
battle.
monsters, it made up for this by
Targeted
itself
by
being
spell
immune
traps.
to battle destruction. This protection
then-
gave the card added utility outside of its role in hand control decks, particularly as a stalling tool, and ironically made it an effective shield against other monsters with discard effects like its own.
Spirit Reaper was also another one that became a very popular card.
Donzalug was really good.
Donzalug was broken.
Even when they weren't
Donzalug-
actually able to
well, yes,
resolve
broken.
their effects, both monsters,
attack
Donzalug in
is
particular,
pretty
were
shit.
capable of applying a lot of
Unless
pressure
you
by simply
start,
being on the field.
like,
It wasn't
second
uncommon for players to use
opponent
cards like
didn't start
Raigeki
first,
and
did not
Mirror
have
just
any.
to kill one, or to search for Gemini Elf
Card
Witch
one
for the
card.
same reason. Conversely,
And
they also
two
made a
tops.
person's power cards
Great.
more valuable, not just because they could be used to get rid of either monster, but also because it was
Honestly,
easy for both Donzalug and Spirit Reaper to take advantage of big swings in momentum. Following up a Raigeki or Dark Hole activation with an attack from one of these two was an often devastating 1-2 punch that was very difficult to recover from.
So
and
that's
there
how
were plenty
Donzalug
of other
works?
cards floating around the meta landscape
Yeah,
that could
you're gonna
generate
have to
similar openings
bop.
for them. A lot of this also applied to Yatagarasu, and that's to say
Yatagarasu
that Yata was
can't
good
be
for many of the same reasons
Card
that
goes
these
aside.
cards were.
Card
But it was
turns owners
different
enter
in
the
a
end
few ways
phases.
that were,
All
while
special
subtle,
comes up.
still
And
very
six battle
important.
damage
One of
opponents.
the most
They
unique
skip their
things
next
about this
draw
card was
phase.
that it didn't have a discard effect, but
Yatagarasu.
instead forced whoever it dealt damage
The
to skip their
ultimate
next draw
game.
phase. Now, at a glance, this may seem almost identical to the
It
effect
is
of a
so
card
much.
like White Magical Hat, since
I'm
both
just-
have the same activation conditions and both leave the opponent with one less card in
Alright.
their hand. The difference becomes apparent when asking the
Yatagarasu
following question:
and
what happens when these monsters
Donzalug
attack
is the new
somebody
meta,
who
I'm
doesn't
guessing.
have any cards in their hand?
The Yata lock. Oh. That is a problem.
Due to the nature of
That
their
is a
effects, there was actually a universal way to
problem.
play around most of the hand control monsters already built into the game. Many players, upon seeing a Spirit Reaper or a
That is-
Donzalug that they didn't have an answer for, would begin setting as many cards as possible from their hand to the field. These monsters, and even cards like Delinquent Duo, for example, couldn't force someone to
Now it
discard
makes
cards they didn't
sense.
have to
Delinquent
begin with, after all.
Duos.
From a certain perspective, though, you could say that's exactly what Yatagarasu did. This was the only hand
Alright,
control
some
monster that could
interesting
actually stop
tactics
the
being
player
played
attack from
here.
getting a hold of new resources. Now, under normal circumstances, practically
Alright.
speaking, an attack from Yatagarasu
Uh-huh.
wasn't any more devastating than an attack from Zalug, Reaper, or Magical Hat. If any of these monsters attacked the player with 4 cards in their hand, then after their next draw phase, they
Get a
would still
draw.
have 4 cards in
Draw.
their hand as opposed to
Card
5.
4
Where
leftover
things diverge
turns.
a little bit is what happens
is
when
the
these
lock,
monsters attack
I'm
somebody
guessing.
who doesn't have any cards in their hand. In 3 of these 4 cases, the effects
just
won't
pulling
actually
guessing.
do anything, and the attacked player will have 1 card in hand after their next
Okay.
draw phase. In Yatagarasu's case, however, after the draw phase, the attacked player's hand will still be empty. This player, now completely out of resources, would, under normal circumstances, not be able to do anything to protect
Yatagarasu.
themselves from being attacked by Yana on their opponent's following turn. And so
This is
their
why you
draw
have
phase would be
cross-out
hit again
designator.
on
You
their next
banish
turn,
the
then
damn
again
Yagarasu.
on the turn after that,
Like,
then again on the turn
you
after that,
really gotta
over
make
and
sure
over
that it
and
gotta be
over until
good.
they finally ran out of life points.
Like you just spam this. Like
Now,
that.
as you may expect, these 3 monsters weren't the only powerful newcomers.
Yatagarasu's
Both
definitely
sets
should
offered
be
players
banned.
quite a few powerful monsters to experiment with, and many of
Like,
them helped beat down just as
actually.
much as some others helped hand control.
This
Legacy of
can't
Darkness in
be.
particular featured plenty of new tools for
Yatagarasu.
beatdown to use, including 2 new level 4 monsters that both
Thunder
had
Nyan
1900
and
attack
Spear
points.
Dragon.
Both monsters had unique stipulations attached to them, so they weren't quite as
Sunlight
practical to
inside
use
of
as
Spear
Gemini Elf, but they
destroys
were a
face
lot
up.
easier to get a hold of. Accessibility aside, Spear Dragon's effect actually made it
Then you
fairly
have Mirror
popular.
Dragon,
It was one of
whatever
the first
shit.
meta-relevant monsters with a
Attack,
piercing effect,
fire,
which
and
basically
defense,
meant that
your
whenever it
opponent
attacked a
inflicts
defense
damage
position
and
monster, it would
damage.
still inflict battle damage to the person who controlled it. This was a pretty big deal, since its presence in the game made setting low defense monsters like Magician of Faith fairly risky when a player
Spear
was low on life
Dragon.
points. This added a
Spear
brand new layer of depth
Dragon.
to the game and changed the way a lot of
All the
players approached its
way
later
of the
stages. Now,
waters.
despite how good it was, Spear Dragon did have one fatal flaw, that being its Goblin Attack Force-esque drawback, which left it helpless for an entire turn after it declared an attack. Fortunately, unlike Goblin Attack Force, it didn't have to stay in defense position for 2 turns, but that being said, it did still have 0 defense points, so it was really easy to get rid of. While it was in defense position, it was ironically actually a perfect attack target for other copies of Spear Dragon, so doing
Spear
anything
Dragon.
with this card when low on life
Goblin
points was
attack
pretty
force.
risky. There was also another monster with a piercing effect in this set, the level 5 Air Knight Parshath. This card was
Air
interesting
Knight
because it had to be
Parshath.
tribute summoned, despite the
The
fact
level
that its
5
attack point
19
score
beat
was
stick.
the same as Spear
And
Dragon.
this
It didn't have all
card
the
is
other drawbacks, but
attacked
tribute summoning
with
was a
an
pretty
attack
big
as
investment,
high than the
especially without the
defense.
trap
With
protection
random
offered by a
defense.
card like Jinzo. That said, Parshath was similar to Jinzo in the sense that it made up for its relatively low attack power with the strength of its
So
effect.
we're learning
Anytime
some
someone
different
used it to
battle
deal damage to their
strategies. Last
opponent,
time
they
it
got to
was
draw
the
a free card.
Jinzo.
It was like a sort of
And now
reverse
it
white
is the
magical hat or
Yatagarasu
Donzalug,
logo.
except because Parshath dealt piercing
Very
damage and
interesting.
had a much higher attack stat,
Like,
its effect was
fairly interesting.
significantly easier to trigger.
Yes.
Given the current meta landscape and the growing power of hand
This
control,
shit's
an effect
crazy,
like this
and gets
was
to draw
extremely
one.
valuable. And ironically, at a time when cards being discarded from the hand was more common than ever,
Well,
the fact that
damage to
Parshath
your
needed to
opponent's
be tribute
life
summoned
points?
wasn't as relevant as it
Hmm.
otherwise would have
Has to
been.
draw
On that
one
note, there
card.
was actually another fairly meta-relevant one tribute monster in Legacy of Darkness, and it couldn't be special summoned from the graveyard
I
like
wonder.
Jinzo and Parshath could. Dark Ruler Hades was a level 6 fiend monster
Dark
that
Ruler
actually had
Hades,
both of them beaten in
one
terms
of the most
attack power.
second
And while it
annoying
was
cards in
sometimes
the
a bit less
game,
convenient to
beating
summon
out
than they were,
Jinzo,
when it did
and having
hit
an
the field,
effect
it had the
as long
potential
as
to
this
be just
card
as impactful.
remains
Any
unfaced up,
monster with an effect that
negate
triggered
the
when that
effects of
monster
effect
was destroyed
monsters
by
destroyed
battle
by
could
the
be
fiend
negated by
monsters.
Hades. And at the time,
On your
that
side of the
included
field,
the
discard down
overwhelming
the special
majority
summon
of
from the
meta-relevant
grave.
effect monsters. Sanguine Witch,
Dark
Morphing
Ruler
Jar,
Hades
Cyber Jar, Mystic
sucks.
Tomato, Nimble Momonga, even Man-Eater Bug. All of
beats
these
out
cards
Jinzo by
essentially got
50.
reduced to normal monsters if they were
Like
destroyed by
insanely.
Hades. This was one of the most
You gotta
oppressive
wonder
effects in the
why.
entire game. Not on the the
Why
same level as
2,
Imperial
4,
Order or Jinzo, but still enough to win games almost
It
by
beats
itself.
up
The fact that it couldn't be
Jinzo
recovered
and
if
the
something
Imperial
happened
Order.
to it did hurt its viability.
Thankfully, it
and
can
unlike
be
both
summoned
Farshant
from the
and Jinzo,
graveyard,
it couldn't
but
be searched
still,
by Witch or Sengen, but
pretty
it was
much.
still popular enough to have a known meta
And
presence. In
shouldn't
terms of
be
sheer raw
for
attack
the Black
power, Hades
Witch.
was one of the most powerful one-tribute
Shit.
monsters in the entire game, second only to Summon Skull.
Yeah,
Well-
and 50 more attack points than Jinzo, first of all. That's massively
That's
important.
massive.
But he wasn't the most powerful monster introduced in
I
Legacy
hate
of Darkness.
that.
There was
That's
another
crazy.
newcomer in
That's
this set,
fucking
even more
crazy.
powerful than Blue Eyes White Dragon. But unlike expectations would suggest, it didn't need 2 tributes to be summoned, and actually didn't need to be tribute summoned at all.
Injection Fairy Lily.
As powerful as he was, Hades was totally eclipsed by Injection Fairy Lily. This card took the design philosophy of
This
cards
card
like Dark
will
Elf
be
and
during
Goblin
the
Attack
damage
Force to a
step.
brand new extreme,
Be the
allowing
player's
players to
turn.
trade 2,000
Pay
life points for a
2,000 to
temporary
increase the
3,000
attack
attack
of this
point boost
monster
during
by
either player's turn. This
3,000
made her
only
significantly
during
more
the
powerful
damage
than
step.
any and all meta-relevant monsters at the time, and she
Injection
was a lot
Fairy
easier to
Lily
summon
is
than any monsters that could come close to
kinda
competing with her thanks to her low level and base stats.
Only needing to
Yeah,
pay
it pretty
2,000
much
to get 3,000, so that's
outclasses almost
3,400.
everything in terms of like attack points.
That's more
it is
than
a bit
Blue
high
Eyes.
risk because you are paying 2,000 life points to activate the effect. Fairy Lily, I also believe, was limited a bit later on as well, so
It
that
is
just goes to
limited,
show the power
so
that that card
thankfully,
has. Because,
you do not
well,
have to
I would
hear
say
that.
Exiled Force is better because it has to kill the monster in battle, right? So if it had some immunity to being destroyed by
Quite
battle,
literally an
or
interesting
just had
tactic.
some other threat, like let's say it was like a flip effect monster or something like that. Injection Fairy Lily is like a little bit weaker in that regard, but like let's say you had outed Jinzo.
Oh my
let's say there's
god,
so many
we
different
are
cards that
1
are
hour
just, like,
away.
big, and
Oh my
sometimes
god,
you just need
gotta
something
stay
bigger
a
to get
while.
over it. Injection Fairy Lily was that
I'll be
go-to
able to
card
stay
for
a
that.
while. This is
Aside
gonna
from
take
the
forever.
obviously steep life point costs needed to attack and defend with her, this card's
my
only real weakness was the
god.
fact that she was Earth attribute, which meant that Mystic Tomato couldn't summon her from the deck. She could be summoned by Giant Rat, but
Thanks,
this
Seeds
required the
Crab,
person
for
playing her to
telling me to
actually
build a
play
psychic
Giant Rat
deck.
in their deck. Many people opted not to, since she was already searchable by both Witch and Sengen, and the monsters that
This
Giant
shit's
Rat could summon from the deck
craze.
aside from her usually weren't worth the deck space they took up. They weren't all terrible though. Included in this pool of monsters was Nimble Momonga, as well as another newcomer from Legacy of Darkness named Exiled Force. This card could tribute itself to destroy any monster on the
Exiled
field. So
Force.
In essence, it was like a walking version of cards like
Is up.
Fissure and Tribute to the Doom.
And
It was
blah,
pretty
blah, blah.
similar to Injection Fairy Lily in the sense that it
Fairly
was a fairly
interesting.
low commitment way to remove
Fairly
monsters
interesting.
from the board when other monsters couldn't do the job. Since they were both searchable by Sengen and Witch, getting a hold of them was also
Sengen,
quite a bit
Black Witch,
easier than getting a
Force.
hold of magic cards with removal effects like Raigeki, Dark Hole, and Fissure.
Raigeki,
Jinzo
Dark
and
Hole,
Imperial
Fissure,
Order could also
Jinzo,
shut down
Imperial
cards like these and
Order,
other forms of
that is a
removal like
lot.
Torrential Tribute and Mirror Force. So there
Torrential
were a lot of
and
in-game situations
Mirror
that
Force.
only these two could deal with. Of the two, Exiled
Magic
Force
Cylinder,
was particularly
I'm
reliable
guessing?
because it didn't have to attack to remove monsters from the field. So cards like Mirror Force and even Magic Cylinder couldn't stop it. Really, the only way to prevent an effect like this from going through
This
was with
is
a card like Solemn
fairly
Judgment, which,
some
while more
Solemn
popular
Judgments.
now than it was when it released, was still far from seeing widespread
now.
competitive play. As
Or
for other
never.
utility monsters introduced in both sets, there were a handful, but they all saw varying levels of success. Twin-headed Behemoth could revive itself at the end of the turn it was
Behemoth.
destroyed. Sasuke Samurai could destroy any
Sasuke
defense
Samurai,
position
not
monster
number
regardless
4.
of how
I
many
wish it
defense
was
points
number
that
4.
monster had, and without flipping that monster face up if it was set
Sasuke!
face down. Lesser Fiend would
Samurai!
remove monsters from the game
The Lesser
entirely when it destroyed
Fiend.
them by battle instead of just sending them to the graveyard. And Guardian Sphinx, well, this card was
Guardian
like a one-sided
Sphinx.
cyber jar that only got rid of the other player's monsters, and
Fucking
instead of
interesting
destroying them,
card.
returned them to the hand. Unlike most other flip
Guardian
monsters,
Sphinx
though,
is a
Guardian
pretty
Sphinx's
interesting
effect
card,
wouldn't
to be
activate
honest
if it was
with
attacked
you.
and flipped face up. Rather,
well,
it
flip
needed to be
into
flip
defense.
summoned, which,
It
coupled
stays
with the
down
fact
defense.
that it
Once
needed
returned
to be
during the main
tribute
phase,
summoned,
you can
made
flip
it
the
a bit less
cards and
consistent than
turn
cards
all
like
monsters from the
Cyberjar.
other
It
side
was
of
still
the
very powerful,
Lord's
though,
field.
especially because the effect
I
could
prefer
be used more than once, but it wasn't nearly
his
as popular as
trap
Cyberjar had
version.
been and still was. Speaking of Cyberjar, though, there was actually another brand new jar monster introduced in Legacy of
Jar.
Darkness, and it was without a doubt the most annoying one yet.
Fiber jar. Aw, fiber
Fiber
jar.
Jar. If we're talking about poorly designed cards,
That was a big card. You got the reset button.
Definitely one of the biggest nightmares ever. Let's just be thankful that Noblemen of Crossout existed, and Exiled Force by extension.
Like the other jar monsters, Fiber Jar's flip effect was explosive. It could and often would
You know what I'm gonna
completely
realize?
change the tempo and flow of a game.
Fiber Jar.
Everything in the game that wasn't removed
Yeah,
from play got
that's
shuffled into the
interesting.
deck by this thing. Cards in the hand, cards on the field, and cards in either
We
graveyard.
just
At a
fuck
time when resource
everything and
management, more
just go to
specifically
straight
controlling the
one.
number of cards in both players' hands was
Holy
more prominent than
shit.
ever. An effect like this was particularly annoying because it allowed players who either were
Just
losing or had
rewrites
essentially already
everything.
lost the game to completely equalize the playing field with just one card.
You're basically playing game 2.
Of course, Fiber Jar also shuffled itself back into the deck with this effect, meaning that it could be used again in the same game and then again after that.
When you read it, it's like, oh, this is kind of cool. It, like, restarts the game, and then you realize that that means the game could essentially go on, like, to infinity, and it kind of just creates all these, like, weird situations, and I'm just happy that card's on the ban list.
The prominence of hand control cards, even outside of dedicated hand control decks, ensured that this card became a staple almost immediately after its release. It was easy to use, and it was an extremely effective comeback tool, arguably more so than both Morphin Jar and Cyber Jar.
anyways,
Plus, it was
I
also
hope
searchable
everything
by
will,
both
like,
Witch and
do
Sengen, who, as
perfect.
mentioned earlier,
And
could
then
be
there's
summoned
some
from the
that are
deck by
not
Mystic Tomato.
gooder.
So in the event that things did start to go south, getting a hold of this thing usually wasn't particularly difficult. There was also a surprising lack of reliable ways
Now,
to counter it
fair
at the time. Exiled Force and
through
Sasuke
what
Samurai
I can
were the
tell.
only searchable ways to
I
destroy
don't know how to
Fiber
tell,
Jar
but
without
this
allowing
is
its effect to
crazy.
resolve. And this likely contributed to the fact that along with Fiber
I
Jar and
was
Galakarasu,
thinking that
Exiled
is
Force
gonna
was
be
one of the most
spamming
popular
forever.
cards introduced in either Legacy of Darkness or Pharaonic Guardian. Most of, as a matter of fact, the overwhelming majority of staples added in both sets were monsters, but there were a handful of new magic and trap cards that managed to shake things
Yeah,
up a little
I
bit.
know, y'all.
Out of nearly 100 new magic and trap cards from Legacy of Darkness and Pharaonic Guardian, these three saw the most immediate tournament
Yeah,
success
I'm
by a
sorry
wide
about
margin.
that.
Book of Moon was the least
It
popular
was a
card
different
here, but
time,
it was
it was a
still
different
played by a large
timing.
portion of the
Different
player base
timing.
due to its immense flexibility. It
Hope
lacked
y'all
the obvious
liking,
power and
subscribing, and
explosiveness
y'all
of
doing
cards like
great.
Raigeki and Pot of Greed, but as a quick play magic card that
know,
could be used on
I'm keeping in
monsters from
touch.
either side of the field, there was a stunning amount of different ways that this card could be used. Ring of Destruction was the standout card here. It was the staple of both sets. Anyone who had the card played it.
You either had this card or you didn't. If you had it, then you would win. If you don't have this card, unfortunately, you're always at the mercy of someone's Ring of Destruction. It has such quick timing, you can activate it whenever you want, and if you're about to lose, you can force a draw.
Its purpose was pretty simple. It was meant to remove annoying monsters from the field, and it could even end games altogether with the burn damage it inflicted. This burn effect was actually extremely relevant, because the card could destroy monsters from either side of the field. If the situation called for it, it could essentially enable any monster to attack twice by destroying them after they'd dealt
Yeah,
damage
Ring
to
of
another
Destruction interaction is not.
This wasn't some sort of niche interaction either. This combo was very practical and very deadly, and was used to end games all the time. Mirage of Nightmare was the weirdest card here, and overall one of the weirdest cards in the game at the time of its release. Mirage let whoever activated it draw up to 4 cards, but during their opponent's standby phase, and depending on how many cards they already had in their
Part
hand,
2
there was a
when?
catch
Yeah,
to that,
we
that
gotta
during their
know
own
that
standby
later.
phase,
We
anyone
gotta
who drew
figure that
cards
out
this way
though.
had to randomly discard the same number.
We
of
can
cards.
figure that out
Unlike with
later.
Graceful Charity,
Later
it
on.
was pretty
I
difficult
don't
to
think
benefit from this
it
discard
will come
effect
out
because the player
soon.
using it had no influence
I'm
over what
pretty
cards
sure
were being sent to
that
the
it
graveyard.
will
Saving
not
those resources
come out
to the graveyard.
later.
The only payout for them is to revive them through Monster Reborn, Premature, or Call the Haunted. So the interesting thing to know with that is, once those resources are gone at this point, there's no payoff to getting rid of them.
While getting rid of a Jinzo or a Sinister Serpent was nice, it was generally better to avoid having to discard cards altogether with this effect, because of, again, the lack of control the player had over what they discarded. The card saw tournament success in spite of this for 2 reasons.
Mirage
First
of
all, the ability
Nightmares.
to draw 4 cards at the same time was excessively powerful, especially at a time when cards with hand destruction effects were all over the place. Second of all, there was actually a way to bypass this discard effect, and that was by destroying the card before it could resolve properly. Since Mirage was a continuous magic card, it had to stay on the field for anything it wanted to
Mirage
happen to
of
actually happen. So just about
Nightmares.
everyone who played it also took to running 2 or more often 3 copies of Mystical Space Typhoon, which they could use to destroy it, something that wasn't particularly common before this point. Since Typhoon was quick play, it could be used during the draw phase or the standby phase to destroy Mirage before it could force the player to discard anything. Mystical Space Typhoon had plenty of other applications outside of this specific interaction as well, so the people who
Fully
played
shows
this
you the
combo
full
usually didn't
tactics
feel like they
of
were
what
losing
people
anything
do.
by playing these additional copies of the card. If Imperial Order was set beforehand,
I'm
it could
currently
also
hoping
be used
for
to negate
what
Mirage's discard
else
effect during the
could be
standby
awesome.
phase. So, especially when considering all of the other cards with draw effects in the game, and the fact that Mirage allowed the player to draw up to 4 at once, it was pretty standard to see it together with one of the cards that could stop its discard effect. Both sets made a handful of other notable additions to the game, like Pharaonic Guardian's Gravekeepers and Legacy of Darkness's Warrior type support, which was the foundation for something that would eventually go on to become known as
you
the
got
Warrior
the
type
goat.
toolbox. But for now, decks built to focus on concepts like these took a backseat to beatdown and hand destruction decks, which were at the time
Reinforcements
without
of
question,
the
two most
army.
powerful and most successful decks in the game. As was
Now
standard
get
by
Junk
this point, each
Speeder!
set's release brought with it an update to the limited list, one in July for Legacy of Darkness and one in August for Pharaonic Guardian. Together, these
Some
updates made a hefty number of
exclusives
changes,
from
and between them, many of the
2003,
new
I
staples ended up in the
see.
limited section. Graceful Charity was also limited in
Beauty
August, which was a pretty big but
boy.
not necessarily unexpected change, since nearly every successful tournament deck had included 2 copies of Charity for as long as they'd been allowed to. The July update also semi-limited 4 new cards from Legacy of Darkness, and the August update took limiter removal and backup soldier off the list entirely, but these were comparatively minor changes. Most players agreed that the limits specifically were pretty significant, which was especially important because these changes were going to be enforced at an upcoming tournament that was, well, it's difficult to properly convey the magnitude of
Some
something
new
like
limited
this, especially compared
cards.
to the extent of what the majority of Yu-Gi-Oh players had experienced by now,
Alright.
which was a typical weekend at locals. This upcoming tournament was a bit more high profile than that.
What? What? What happened? Huh? Oh! The Yu-Gi-Oh tournaments today. Jesus, that is so old. So many people. So many
Announced on
people.
June
That's
30th of
nuts.
2003, the World Championship
And
was an
some of you
invitational
are
tournament
also
featuring
watching,
18
so hey,
players
maybe
from
you
all
can
around the
subscribe
world.
as well.
The participants were all either national champions or top-ranking players on the game's official
Holy, the
leaderboard,
first
which kept track
people
of
of the
player scores
community.
based on their performance at smaller
The
tournaments. All 18
many
of these players
first
had already proven
nerds.
that they were among the best in the world, so it goes without saying
Awesome.
that this was, up to this point, the pinnacle of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Altogether, the deck list submitted by the
Everyone
players paint a
be
clear picture of
joining.
the contemporary
Everyone-
metagame.
That's a
Control and
girl.
beatdown were the decks to look out for,
And
the
of
only
course,
decks
everyone's
represented at
playing the
World
full meta.
Championship. This was the perfect opportunity for hand
Alright.
control and those who believed in it to prove what it was really capable of by
Side
putting
decking
itself to the
Jinzo's
test against the deck
nuts.
that had defined the game for the past year and a half.
That's
To
in
say that the hand
Canada's
control
hand
players were
destruction?
successful in doing this would be an understatement. Almost all of the beatdown players
EV0X,
at the
did
tournament
you
were
know
eliminated during the first round, and those that
MFT
did make
is
it to
holding
round 2
a
were playing
tournament
beatdown
today?
control hybrids. None of these
Yes,
players would go on to win a
but
single
I
match
can't
during the
do it
tournament's
right
top
now
8,
because
leaving
tomorrow
control as the
I
only deck
have
represented
a
from the semifinals
college
onward. There was no
and
room left for doubt at this point.
currently,
Beatdown had been
I can
completely
only stream for
obliterated,
2
and hand control
hours.
had taken its place
So
as
if
the
I
new
wanted to
best
do
deck in the game.
NFT's, NFT Yugi's tournament, I would, but currently I don't have the proper time.
Two of the top 4 players had built notably
next
aggressive
time.
versions of the hand control deck. Yuin Lung from Hong Kong played 2 copies of Don Zalug and 3 copies of Drop Off, while Mike Rosenberg from the United States played 3 copies of Spirit Reaper and 2 copies of Drop Off.
Yeah,
Both of these players were paired against
yeah,
each other
maybe
during
next
the
time.
semifinals, and in a written report of the event submitted
Maybe
to
next time I'm
Tojo.com,
the
Rosenberg explains that Lung was able to
MNTF.
clean 2-0
Maybe next
victory.
time.
If I recall, it was pretty lopsided. I don't think I had a very
Nguyen,
good matchup against him, honestly. He was just a better player. I
Nguyen,
felt like I was pretty fortunate
Nguyen,
to get through
Leung
as many single
from
elimination
Hong
matches
Kong.
as I did. And I like
Nice.
it's really hard for me to recall
Nice.
what the details were.
Yep.
I
I'm
do
guessing he's
not
the
recall
champion.
having a close match against him.
After the semifinals,
Honestly,
Rosenberg
cool.
would play against White Soon, also from the United
That's a
States, to determine
Chinese.
who would come in 3rd place. The match that would determine the champion was between Yuin Lung
Champion.
and Shigeki Kitamura from Japan. The first 2 games were decided by Ring of Destruction. In both cases, it allowed the person playing it to push for
Gemini,
immense
Soul
damage all
Eater,
at once
Ring
with
of
just a single
Destruction,
monster. Kitamura won the first game,
Kaikyu,
and Lung won the second. Though something worth
Furious
mentioning
actions,
about Game 2 is that it
detailed
was
all
extremely
in
long
there.
because Fiberjar's effect resolved 4
That was
times
all
throughout
you
it.
needed
I
to
just
take.
recall the 2 casters who were doing an announcement for those who were like watching from the big screen
baby.
in that tournament venue. You could hear them incrementally getting more tired as they talk about a fiber jar flipping and basically
Fiber
resetting
jar.
both of what these decks are trying
Of
to do.
course.
They were both hand control.
Of course,
As
it
the
had to be
last two
Fiber
have been,
Jar.
Game 3 was extremely intense, but was ultimately decided by a late-game heavy storm played by Lung. This allowed him to safely attack for game, winning him both the match against Kitamura and the title of world champion. Mike Rosenberg, meanwhile, secured a 3rd-place finish by winning his match against Huaitao Soon, meaning that both of these highly aggressive builds of the hand control deck went completely
So, Yun Leung hand destructions. Not gonna lie, this is probably a good deck at the time.
undefeated at the World Championship
At their
aside
time,
from their lone
this
run-in
is their
with each
best
other.
deck.
Something Rosenberg's deck lacked in comparison
So
to Lung's, however,
cool.
was the consistency provided by playing Mystic Tomato.
These days,
Lung
we run
and
in
Kitamura
OCG.
both
We
played
run
3 copies of the card,
gummies
and they were the only players
and
at the World
K9
Championship who did. Even Upper
Vanquish
Deck's official
Soul.
coverage of the tournament made note of this, remarking on the
Such
power of
cool
to
architect
paraphrase them,
names.
the heavy deck
In the
manipulation
past, they had
provided by
Jinzo
Sangan and Mystic Tomato. Lung and Kitamura's success at this
and
event would make
trap
playing Mystic
cards.
Tomato, and to be more specific,
Even
playing
though they
2
had
or 3 copies of
Jinzo.
the card significantly more popular going forward. Something else that played a role in Yuin Lung's victory, though, was his side deck, which was more well-tuned to the
Yeah,
competition
it's
than
kinda
anyone
nuts.
else's in the room.
Everybody
helped
playing
me that like
a lot.
my side deck was also
They had
I mean frankly
fucking
speaking it's kind of a
Karibo.
joke. When you look at those cards, I wasn't
That
utilizing it nearly as
shit's
much since I was pretty
hilarious
all
right
in
there.
on
That
the destruction
shit's
strategy, and he
hilarious.
just knew how to utilize a side deck when I really didn't. So that was the biggest challenge. I was winning really heavily on the back of just the hand control strategy being so good, and a lot of competitors, even in the SoCal scene, like it was an era where you didn't have a lot of information unless you had a leg up with stuff like the OCG, and you were learning from metas that had already kind of developed. And so, like, it's really just that main strategy carried a lot to the point that I didn't need to rely on side decking skills, and he absolutely had a side deck plan.
Lung's side deck was notably anti-hand control, which may speak to his experience as a player of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Official card game. OCG, the version of the game originally released in Japan and other parts of Asia before it was localized in the rest of the world. For context, the cards from Legacy of Darkness and Pharaonic Guardian had all been playable in these regions since May of 2002, meaning that the players from these regions had already seen the effects that these cards had on the metagame a long time before the World Championship. Seeing as he was now the World Champion and also had an extra year's worth of insight and experience, many players opted to copy his deck entirely, side deck and all, given the fact that it was obviously very powerful. Even aside from players building replicas of Lung's deck, hand control saw a notable spike in popularity after the World Championship, though due to the fact that it included many ultra and secret rare cards like Dawn Zalug and Yagarasu, Beatdown continued to see plenty of play at the local tournament level. For once, though, it wasn't because it was the best deck in the game, but because it was the easiest to play and the cheapest to build. As Robert Smith wrote during his official coverage of the 2003 World Championship, the emergence of this deck hails a new age in Yu-Gi-Oh! As the best monster in your deck isn't always the one with the highest attack value. This certainly seemed to be the case, as hand control's total dominance was unquestionable at this point. All that remained to be seen was whether or not things would stay that way when the next core booster set came out.
Magician's
Force was released
this is the one that I
after
was
the date of
talking
the World
about.
Championship
Magician's
and
Force.
just over a month after the start of the 4th season of competitive play. One thing that's noteworthy about it is that it was the first set to use the term spell card instead of magic card. This was due to legal reasons that aren't relevant to the competitive history of the game, but it is important since from here on out we'll be referring to these as spell cards. Funnily enough, none of the new spell cards were really that good anyway. All of the worthwhile cards in the set were monsters, and many of them were ironically spellcaster type. First of all, the set featured two more level 4 monsters with 1900 attack, the ultra rare Luster Dragon and the super rare Skilled Dark Magician. Since they were both lower rarity, they weren't nearly as cost prohibitive as Gemini Elf, and neither of them had any stipulations the way that Thunder Nyan Nyan and Spear Dragon did. The only thing that kept them from truly replacing Gemini Elf was the fact that they both had more than 1500 defense points, meaning Witch of the Black Forest couldn't grab them from the deck. There was another level 4 1900 attack monster in the set that didn't have this issue though, a card that was, for multiple reasons actually, measurably better than Gemini Elf.
Because in Magician's Force,
Magical
there's
Breaker
actually a lot of
Warrior.
cards in here that were really, really good. This is when like 1900 became standard. I guess everyone uses Super Saiyan 2 now.
Breaker the Magical Warrior was, like Kaiku, a monster with both a high attack stat and a powerful effect. Unlike Kaiku, however, he can actually go head-to-head with the most powerful level 4 monsters in the game. While Breaker technically only had 1600 attack points, whenever he was normal summoned, he received a spell counter that gave him an extra 300.
The power slowly kind of climbed up, and see, Breaker the Magical Warrior was basically a 1900 basic, with a decent effect.
A player who controlled Breaker could trade this spell counter for the ability to destroy any spell or trap card on the field, regardless of whether it was face up or not.
Breaker found homes in almost everything.
All right, so we're gonna start with my favorite card of all time, Breaker the Magical Warrior. So why this card was so powerful was because Breaker was essentially a mystical space typhoon on a body, and what's even better is that if you didn't need the mystical space typhoon effect of Breaker, he was probably the strongest normal summon in the entire game because he would be 1900 attack, and that only lost to like very specific things or removal. Breaker is, in my head, I think one of the few cards that actually like has its effect named after him. People would summon Breaker and they would say break the back row. I think that just kind of goes as a testament to just how just the legacy and the impact that that card really had in the game.
Jesus, his hair is so huge. He flown that.
Breaker couldn't hog the spotlight all to himself, though, because there was another level 4 effect monster in this set that caught people's attention almost immediately. It didn't have 1900 attack points, but what it could do when it hit the field made this practically a non-issue.
Oh, it also had fucking tribe infecting virus. The king.
The king to destroy every monster?
Tribe Infecting Virus had all the makings of a staple monster. It was good for all the reasons that Exiled Force was good, but was better in a handful of ways due to multiple advantages. It had more attack points, could destroy more monsters at once, and didn't leave the field when it used its effect. It also wasn't once per turn.
And you can tribe your opponent as much as you want as long as you have cards in your hand.
Unsurprisingly, Tribe was one of the most popular cards in the set and immediately became a metagame staple alongside Breaker. When the ban list was updated in November, these were the only 2 cards added and both of them were limited. Curiously though, this update to the limited list didn't even acknowledge another new card from Magician's Force, the card that was arguably the most powerful card in the set and definitely the most problematic. A level 1 spellcaster monster named Magical Scientist.
Magical Scientist is like a nightmare fuel for me. I think this is like the first mistake in the game.
This card allowed players to special summon any level 6 or lower fusion monster in the game by simply paying 1,000 life points. At first glance, its effect may not seem all that strong because the monster it summoned couldn't attack directly and was returned to the extra deck during the end phase.
Well, the thing is, it's not once per turn. It introduced the notion of first turn killing. FTKs, they're just random strategies that appear every now and then. This was kind of the first rendition where you're able to just shoot your opponent to death with a catapult turtle. It's like, so what happened? Oh, you lose!
As long as someone could manage to get both Magical Scientist and Catapult Turtle on the field at the same time, it was impossible to stop them from pulling off a combo that would kill their opponent on their first turn. Doing this might sound a bit more difficult than it actually was, because Catapult Turtle is a level 5 monster with no built-in special summoning condition. But cards like Reasoning, Last Will, Monster Reborn, and Gillosaurus could all be used to make sure that one way or another, these two ended up on the field together.
It was too easy to do. Anytime an FTK is introduced into the game, simply just not fun. They're playing solitaire.
So fucking weak.
The only thing that the Magical Scientist deck really lacked at this point was consistency. At the time of Magician's Force's release, the accessible card pool was fairly limited in what it could do to streamline the process of getting a hold of the pieces needed to perform this combo. So while Magical Scientist FTK didn't dethrone hand control, it almost immediately established its presence in the metagame, and Magical Scientist himself was actually a welcome addition to many hand control decks. He was a searchable way to access pretty much any level 6 or lower fusion monster in the game, which, as one would expect, was extremely valuable. While the monsters he summoned couldn't attack directly, there was nothing that stopped them from attacking other monsters, and a lot of the fusion monsters he could summon had extremely powerful effects. Thousand Eyes Restrict could get annoying monsters like Jinzo off the field, Dark Walter the Terrible like Hades could deal with flip monsters or monsters like Mystic Tomato, Sanguinar Witch, and Ryu Senshi could protect the player from threatening trap cards like Mirror Force, Magic Cylinder, and Ring of Destruction. So the release of Magician's Force didn't change anything as far as hand control being the best deck was concerned. If anything, it had just made the deck stronger with these 3 new staple cards. It did introduce a handful of cards that saw some experimentation at the local level, but none aside from these 3 that had immediate, long-lasting effects on the metagame.
It did not have a ton of relevance on the tournament scene, sans like the 3 that were listed. Which, to be fair, one of them did introduce a new deck. Like there were some things that like aged pretty well, and I think people toyed around with some cards. Marionette was another one of them, I think. Yeah, like it wasn't particularly good. There's a lot of cards that people tried to build around locally, but they weren't exactly successful. Marionette, I think, was one of the ones that stands out to me at the local tournament scene, just because it could get very large, and it did have some card advantage built into it.
There was still one more booster set scheduled to be released before the end of 2003 at this point, but just like with Magician's Force, it would only debut a small number of cards that immediately impacted competitive play.
Didn't have an impact immediately. Definitely had much more of an impact later.
Dark Crisis was rather a minor set.
We're like 30 more minutes until we can
notably DD Warrior Lady had the most relevance in local tournaments at that time.
Released on December 1st of 2003, Dark Crisis was the first core booster set that didn't really have an immediate effect on the tournament scene. The set wasn't terrible, and did feature a handful of decent cards, but only a handful. The standout among them was DD Warrior Lady, a card similar in function to Exile Force. Whenever this card battled another monster, whether she was the one attacking or the one being attacked, she could remove remove herself and that other monster from the game entirely. Because there were already other monsters with similar removal effects in the card pool at this point, like Exile Force and Tribe Infecting
Alright, now I know.
she wasn't
Due to
totally game-changing, but
card
she was
battles
good
after
enough to
damage
become a metagame
calculation,
staple
remove
and find her way
opponent's
into most
monster
deck
in
lists.
this
One advantage that she did
and
have
this
over both of
card
them was that
play.
her effect could be triggered during either player's turn, which made getting her off the field without another removal effect pretty annoying.
Yeah, she was very good, very protective.
DD Warrior
Very
Lady, what differentiated it so much from
what
Exiled
could
Force
be
is one of the
used.
biggest downsides of Warrior Lady is that you have to go to your battle phase, right?
I
But
have
one thing
no
that Warrior
idea.
Lady did very well that
If
Exiled
she
Force
is
did not is the fact that it
fairly
could
well against
banish
these.
or remove from play in old terms
But
whatever it
we
was
will
attacking
try.
into. And why that was so unique is because you could deny your opponent's Sangan, for instance. There's just so
Deny
many
the
different
Sangan.
cards that you could just banish and ensure they didn't hit the graveyard, so that, for instance, they couldn't resurrect it, it wouldn't get an effect because it didn't hit the graveyard, so on, so on. And also it had a very decent stat line as well. It was 1500 attack, so like it wasn't tiny, so it even just held up pretty well on its own, and it just created another interesting dynamic for the game.
At the time of the set's release, DD Warrior Lady was overwhelmingly its most popular monster, but one of the set's secret rares, Vampire Lord, caught the attention of many players as well. One of the things that made playing him so enticing was that Pharaonic Guardian included a lot of cards designed to support zombie-type monsters, the most notable of which being Pyramid Turtle. Pyramid Turtle was pretty similar to all of the attribute
Pyramid
summoners that
Turtle.
made their debut in Magic Ruler, but instead of summoning monsters of a specific attribute with 1500 or less attack from the deck, Pyramid Turtle could summon any zombie-type monster from the deck as long as it had 2000 or less
Oh
defense
yeah,
points, and this,
Vampire
of course, included
Lord.
Vampire Lord. Playing this engine was, in theory, a pretty
I
easy
thought
way to get a
Vampire
monster
Lord
onto
was
the field capable
the
of dealing
the
with
big
just about
brother
anything
of
that didn't need to be
Witty
triggered
Phantom.
summoned. Since he also revived himself whenever he was destroyed
I
by
was
a card
wrong.
effect, permanently dealing with him was actually
Kinda stupid
pretty
when you
tough.
think about
Vampire
that.
Lord
Actually,
was kind of, it was one of those cards that was really annoying to deal with unless you had
This
something
guy
like funny
looks
enough DD
like
Warrior
Justin
Lady, because
Bieber
as long as it
if
kept
he
going to
was
the
mixed
graveyard
with
by
Michael
card effect, it didn't have
Jackson's
like, it was a 5-star monster
Vampire.
and it wasn't like the highest stats, but it was annoying enough that it warranted needing some sort of option to deal with it, because again, like, this is what we were saying earlier when we talked about Pharaonic Guardian. Zombie decks were starting to kind of come up a bit, and people were
They
like looking to Vampire
trying
Lord
with
as like
the
a card.
zombie decks.
Also, Vampire
They
Lord's
were
effect that a lot of
trying.
people overlook of sending cards from the
Ooh, they
deck
were
to the graveyard
trying.
was actually pretty big, because you
Oh
have to
my
think, when you're
God,
back in the old
brother.
Yu-Gi-Oh days, and like the 10 to 15
Like,
spells in their deck are like
they
all really,
trying
really
with
good,
the
and you force them to send a
zombie
spell to the graveyard. It's not like instant
They're
card advantage,
trying
but like
with the
it's
zombie
forcing them
deck.
to get rid of one of the best cards at their disposal straight out of their deck. So it was not only just a persistent threat, but it was also slowly draining your opponent of resources, and just a very solid
The
card all around.
As good
resources.
as he was, though, Vampire Lord didn't have the same metagame presence as DD Warrior Lady, and was really only being experimented with at this point.
Vampire Lord people played it when they probably shouldn't have.
Dark Crisis did also feature another level 4 1900 attack monster, one that was easier to get a hold of than both Skilled Dark Magician and Luster Dragon, and, unlike both of them, actually searchable by Witch of the Black Forest. Archfiend Soldier was the first true budget alternative to Gemini Elf that didn't come with any caveats or drawbacks.
This set actually had a lot of decent, like, commons and easy to access cards. All the best players have 1900 V6. Well, I guess most of the rest of the public will also now get access to 1900 attackers.
The spell and trap cards in Dark Crisis were mostly underwhelming, with a handful of exceptions. Sakuretsu Armor made its debut
Sakuretsu
here, but only saw
Armor.
limited play due to the fact that Mirror Force was obviously superior. Immediately following its release, Butterfly Dagger Elmo was probably the most talked about spell or trap card in this set. It was an equip spell, but wasn't actually notable for what it did when it was equipped to a monster. The reason so many people initially had their eyes on this card was because of its potential ability to cause an infinite loop with its second effect. Gearfried the Iron Knight immediately destroyed any equipped spell that was equipped to it, and so if a player had him on the field and Elma in hand, they could activate the card infinitely, since it would keep getting destroyed before adding itself back to the hand. Because Magician's Force had introduced a lot of cards that gained spell counters every time a spell card was activated and could activate effects by removing these spell counters, there was a lot of potential for abuse with this infinite loop, particularly through Royal Magical Library, which could allow a player to draw through all the cards in their deck with this combo. The card, as well as decks built to abuse it, saw more speculation than actual competitive success, though. While it, like Magical Scientist, opened the door to its own FTK, Magical Scientist decks were simply better than decks built to use this card work. It was just more consistent and required the player to have less specific cards in hand.
Butterfly Dagger Alma and Gearfried was
Still
very
gonna
people
say it
started
like
to
that.
take notice to that set. It wasn't anything
When
too
you
major
call
taking
the
off, but people did
Gearfried,
take note that this is an
get
interesting interaction.
Speaking of these two decks, Dark Crisis did also include spell reproduction, which made both of them a decent bit more consistent, but didn't push either of them over the edge.
Yeah, so like it had most of its pieces spell reproduction probably moved the needle a couple points. But like I think most people were pretty set in their ways. Like they either played the deck and then they would take in the upgrades, or they wouldn't play the deck because they thought it was cheese. There were some consistency issues with the deck as well. So like especially if you're doing like single elimination tournaments, like you could have a pretty boring day or a quick one.
In order to address these FTK strategies, the next update to the ban list in February limited both Butterfly Dagger Elma and Magical Scientist, which reduced the consistency of both decks by a little bit. Vampire Lord was also limited, along with another new card from Dark Crisis named Reflect Bounder that had seen some success after the set's release, but wasn't anywhere near as popular as DD Warrior Lady. This update to the limited list, like Dark Crisis itself, wasn't particularly impactful, and did little to change the way the game was played overall. Tournaments were more or less filled with the same deck lists as before, only these deck lists now had one or two DD Warrior Ladies thrown into the mix. The release window of Dark Crisis was just the calm before the storm, however, as there was another booster set slated to release just a month after this update to the Forbidden and Limited list. Its release on March 1st of 2004 would completely overshadow the release of Dark Crisis, and the cards it was going to add to the game seemed capable of warping the entire meta almost overnight.
There was this crazy set that came out called Invasion of Chaos that changed everything in Yu-Gi-Oh!
Blackluster Soldier. Ooh. Dark and... Stop. That's a lot. That's a lot.
Invasion of Chaos is literally the reason why we have the Forbidden list.
And that's why
We may have talked about
nice
the graveyard being the resting place of most monsters, but no, now that is just your gas tank.
Among other things, Invasion of Chaos introduced a series of monsters that could be special summoned by removing certain monsters in the graveyard from play. Two of these monsters in particular were, to put it lightly, a pretty big deal.
You got Blackluster Soldier, you have Chaos Emperor Dragon. Both of these monsters have 3,000 attack, and they are special summons. They don't eat up your once per turn normal summon.
You have a 3,000 attack monster that you can special summon for free.
But on top of being big monsters, they had crazy effects.
Yup.
Blackluster Soldier had two effects. He could
move one monster.
I don't even care what effect this dude. The other effect, you just get two attacks.
Second
that
attack.
at any moment you could possibly die out of nowhere.
And then Chaos Emperor Dragon doesn't let people play Yu-Gi-Oh!
It was a power horse shit.
These weren't just staples the way prior powerful cards had been. As soon as it became legal to play them, they conquered and reshaped the tournament scene overnight. They weren't just slotted into decks the way that most cards were. They were so powerful that most people played them and changed the way they built the rest of their deck just to make sure they could use these two optimally. This gave birth to a brand new deck, of course, which most people simply referred to as Chaos.
Most of the best cards in the game at the time were already light and dark anyway, so you just had these cards that naturally fit into your deck and would just incentivize you to want to play these overpowered cards.
Moving forward, light and dark monsters became significantly more desirable, and while this did breathe life into some monsters that otherwise probably wouldn't have seen play, it also made staple cards that just about everyone was already playing better than they were in the first place. So rather than outright replacing many of the decks that were prominent before the release of Invasion of Chaos, the Chaos deck formed by combining these new Chaos monsters with these existing decks. In other words, truly pure Chaos decks were rare. It was more common to see decks like Chaos Beatdown, Chaos Zombie, Chaos Warrior, so on and so forth. More than any of these, though, there was one deck that synergized with the new Chaos cards particularly well. With the sole exception of Yatagarasu, all of the hand control monsters were either light or dark, and all of them could be summoned by their respective recruiter. On top of that, and perhaps most importantly, Chaos Emperor Dragon could fulfill the deck's win condition by itself. Invasion of Chaos hadn't brought with it the end of hand control, it had just made the deck stronger. Rather than allow itself to be made obsolete by the new Chaos engine, hand control merged with it, in the process creating one of the most dominant decks in the game's history.
Chaos Control!
Chaos Control.
Despite the fact that it wasn't light or dark, Yatagarasu was one of the deck's linchpins because of the way it interacted with Chaos Emperor Dragon. Though Emperor Dragon's effect was a double-edged sword designed to leave both players on an equal playing field, the person playing it could dodge having their entire hand depleted as long as there was a Sanguinar Witch on their side of the field when the effect was activated. See, Chaos Emperor Dragon didn't
That could
stop
be
the cards
funny.
it sent to the graveyard from activating their effects. If it sent
But
Sengen or
sometimes I
Witch from
just
the field
choose
to the
not
grave
to
this
be-
way, they could still
I
search for
am
anything they
such a
normally would.
Yugi
Yatagarasu happened to be
Cooper.
searchable by both.
This actually slotted into hand destruction decks really easily, and Chaos Emperor Dragon was just over the top with like a Sangan or a Witch of the Black Forest on the battlefield, because then you get the effect as soon as everybody loses all their cards, your opponent gets one draw step.
Y'all better be good.
If it's a brick, they just never draw another card again because you have Yata in your hand.
These bits are wild. If you're paying
Oh, guess
$1,000
what? If you happen
for
to have a
one
Sangan or a Witch
Yu-Gi-Oh
of the Black
card,
Forest on your field, just
don't even
pay
talk to me.
1,000 and you can search Yatagarasu and just
Unless
automatically
it's
win the
rare.
game.
Like very
It's
rare.
because it introduced a lock into the game.
But
right?
if it's
a
just
lock,
for
which is
your
worse than,
deck to be
some people say worse
fully
than an FTK,
workable,
but it's
then
basically
don't.
in the same realm of first turn killing
No.
someone. You lock them out of
Smith
drawing.
is not worth it when you
Yeah, but like I said,
can just
those
play
chaos
any other
monsters
deck.
were literally, they
I
took
will
all of the good stuff
have you
that
the
we've had throughout the
same
years, and
good
they
enough
were the
result.
missing piece of the puzzle to kind
Tournament's
of complete
not
the trifecta
a good
of
result
what
of
we
you
deemed
just
one of the
wasting
most toxic
thousands.
formats in the game.
This is a hobby.
But there was no way these cards
Note
could
this,
actually
this is a
change
hobby.
things that
Like-
much, right?
Yu-Gi-Oh is a hobby. Like people can play, have fun, and you go to your locals, you play, you win, you lose sometimes. You have fun with it. You don't need to spend thousands and millions just so you can be better at it. You can just play it as is. Like I run a twin live deck mixtured with some psychic rovers. Like I know how to have fun. I don't need to be meta to fully have fun.
These were two unsearchable monsters. Sure, some people might
You
build their
don't
decks
need
around them, but the
meta
idea that they were going to completely
have
change the
fun.
entire tournament scene, well, that was just ridiculous, wasn't it?
Anyway,
Within about a week of the
Anyway,
set's
I
release,
think I
Chaos
bought
decks
Via
were
Bell
everywhere,
Stars.
at both the local level and the regional level, but many players were skeptical of the
jokes,
viability of these new cards. There was
I
already a decent
cannot
amount of
have
debate
enough
about whether Chaos was
I
better
am
than
a
Control or
college
vice
broke
versa,
boy,
and while plenty of
as
people
you
were
know,
leaning towards
as I just
Chaos, there
said
were
so.
also plenty of other people who believed that non-Chaos builds
Conserve
with
your
hand
money,
control
guys.
were still the best decks in the game, and that things were going to stay that way as
Later.
long as the cards
Hobbies
that
are
allowed the deck
for
to function were
later.
legal to play. Classic hand control lists
Be
that didn't
surviving
include either of the
from food
Chaos monsters
is your
continued to
top
populate
priority.
and perform well at regional events, as did
because
non-Chaos
some
versions of
things
Warrior
on
and
sale
Zombie,
must be
along with a few
available
left field picks
that I
like
saw.
Gravekeepers.
doesn't mean you should buy immediately.
All
You
of these
buy it
decks
later.
ran into the same
You buy it
problem,
later.
though. For some
You
reason,
don't need to buy it
they
now.
kept losing to Chaos.
Just buy it later.
You were just at such a severe disadvantage if you were not
Chaos,
playing
hand
some
control,
sort of
beat
chaos
down,
build.
zombies,
Though all the way
warriors,
through late March and even early April, there were still
gatekeepers.
plenty of people being openly critical of the idea of building an entire deck around two unsearchable monsters. Chaos was proving to be pretty flexible. The more time passed, the more apparent it became that it wasn't strictly necessary to build a deck around these two. It wasn't unheard of for people to play 3 Blackluster Soldier and 3 Chaos Emperor Dragon, but it was also pretty common for people to just play one of both, one of one or the other, 2 of both, 2 of one or the other. The ratios didn't really seem to matter. Before long, some vanilla hand control players even started playing a single copy of Chaos Emperor Dragon in the side deck. The
Overview
cards
of the meta.
kind of fit into a lot of
Chaos,
decks, especially
and
Control. Not
headcanons.
much, if anything, needed to be changed to
Gosh
include them. Though
darn,
non-Chaos
damn
decks were
interesting.
still performing well, for example, at 2 different regional tournaments,
They
a
do be
non-Chaos Warrior
interesting
deck
right
came in
now.
first place. It was becoming more and more standard to play at least one Emperor, Dragon, or Soldier. By the middle of April, almost every Control deck had started playing one of both, and what little room for deviation existed at this point would be almost completely eliminated by the next update to the Forbidden and Limited list. On April 17th, Blackluster Soldier and Chaos Emperor Dragon were both limited, but this didn't actually diminish their metagame presence. Strangely, even though there were only 2 of them from this point forward, and they were more often than not the only monsters in any deck that played them that couldn't be searched for by either Witch or Sangan, most people still called the decks that played them Chaos decks. Again, it wasn't that decks that played them were dramatically different in composition than decks that didn't. It's just that they were both so powerful that they turned any game that they participated in into a race to get one of them onto the field first. or to take the steps necessary to make sure they couldn't hit the field in the first place. Summoning either of them was almost like an alternate win condition, and there were plenty of cards in the game that made it easy to perform the setup necessary to do so. The existence of the Chaos Monsters made putting resources into the graveyard desirable, to the extent that the intended drawbacks of cards like Graceful Charity and Painful Choice were more benefit than cost at this point. And not just these two monsters either, this set added 2 more high-profile Chaos Monsters to the game.
Chaos Black Soldier.
Some people took to running Chaos Sorcerer, essentially a cheaper, less powerful version of Black Luster Soldier, in order to supplement the 2 more powerful Chaos Monsters.
Chaos Sorcerer just by itself is just an incredibly powerful card. Like, yeah, it has the same cost as BLS or Chaos Emperor, so maybe you're not getting as much value as you would from those other cards, but Chaos Sorcerer is still a 2300 attack monster that can be special summoned for free, and at the very least, it can just banish a monster. There's plays where you can just summon out Chaos Sorcerer, banish one of your opponent's cards, and then use it as tribute fodder for, like, Jinzo? Like, that's insane!
Even more popular than Chaos Sorcerer was Dark Magician of Chaos, sometimes referred to as DMOC. It didn't function the same way the other Chaos monsters did, but at the time of its release, it was widely considered to be the most powerful 2 tribute monster in the entire game. Its ability to immediately retrieve any spell cards from the graveyard further incentivized the use of cards like Painful Choice and Mirage of Nightmare, since now on top of the fact that light and dark monsters in the graveyard could be considered live resources, Dark Magician of Chaos could turn any spell cards in the graveyard into live resources as well. Its second effect was extremely good at countering Chaos decks, since it could rob Black Luster Soldier and Chaos Emperor Dragon of the fuel they needed to summon themselves, and it was also good at countering vanilla control decks or any other decks that played cards with effects that triggered when they were sent to the graveyard, which was just about every deck in the metagame at this point. While most people still agreed that tributing 2 monsters just to summon another was almost never worth it, this wasn't really a problem for DMOC, since he ended up in the graveyard very frequently. Most people didn't tribute summon him. It was a lot more common to summon him from the graveyard with one of the game's 3 revival staples. When using Monster Reborn specifically, he could add the Reborn back to hand, allowing the player to special summon another monster from their graveyard immediately. With either Soldier or Emperor Dragon in hand to back this up, this was almost always enough to deal lethal damage, and this could all be done in one turn, without even normal summoning a monster. High-level play was accelerating to a breakneck pace, one where games could be decided in as few as 2 or 3 turns.
More chaos.
Most people had more than enough draw power to make sure they saw one of the 2 Chaos monsters that early, and as soon as one of them hit the field, it was game over. As the format continued to evolve, it became clearer and clearer that the only way to compete with Chaos was to play Chaos or to build a deck that could end games just as quickly as it could.
Some doctors. Oh, Manticore. Alright. New decks.
PK decks were still running rampant.
The return of the
Chaos
Doctor.
actually made them a bit more consistent by
The
adding
Doctor
reloads
is
to the
in.
game, a card that could
And
take
he has a
unplayable
new way
hands
of
and turn them into
being
hands capable
played.
of performing the one-turn kill combo. Some people turned to Magical Scientist
With
FPK
reload.
because they believed it was one of the only decks fast enough to compete
But I
with
can
Chaos.
reload.
The new set
Alright,
also laid the
fairly
groundwork for
interesting.
another similar
Fairly
deck by
interesting.
adding Manticore of Darkness to the card pool.
I'll be completely honest. I have no idea why it keeps splashing it around, but...
This card was mostly unremarkable, aside from its involvement in a loop where it could summon itself
shit's
from the graveyard
insane.
infinitely. Combined with Card of Safe Return, a card released all the way back in Labyrinth of Nightmare, this combo enabled anyone who performed it to draw through their entire deck in one turn if they wanted to. Neither deck was consistent enough to truly compete with Chaos, though.
And now it's just more chaos. Wow, that is a lot of chaos.
Other decks capable of operating at a high speed, like Warrior Rush
That
and
is
Machine Limiter Removal
kinda
Beatdown, did
crazy.
their best to compete with Chaos, and while they managed to place well, it was impossible to ignore that they
Everybody
were being
just playing
outperformed. They
Chaos.
just couldn't close the gap, no matter how hard they
Everyone
tried,
just
even
playing
with the help
Chaos.
of the next core booster set.
And now Ancient Sanctuary. You got Ancient Sanctuary. What?
Ancient Sanctuary was released on June 1st of 2004, but it was a total dud of a set. Only 2 of its 111 new cards saw any immediate success, and neither of them did anything to make Chaos any worse.
What does that mean? Well, we don't know. Most of them are still playing. There's loads of chaos.
The cards that did see success only did so to a limited extent as well. Zaborg the Thunder Monarch was played, but only rarely, and
Zaborg
usually as
the
a one-up
Thunder
in the
Monarch.
side deck. Enemy Controller was much more popular, but nowhere near as popular as the
And
most
Enemy
noteworthy cards from
Controller.
prior sets. At the 2004 U.S. National
Now you
Championship,
can
many players
control
outright
your
ignored these
enemies.
cards in favor of older cards that had been rediscovered, given a new purpose thanks to the Chaos Monsters.
Metamorph,
Just before the proper
Character
U.S.
Swap,
National
Apprentice
Championship, there were 2
Magicians.
last chance qualifier events where players could compete for a chance to be invited to
Well,
nationals.
many of those
Over
decks
200
aren't
players
full to
participated
the
in
power.
these events, and 85%
They're
of them were
great
playing at
for
least one
Envoy of the
Blackluster
Beginning,
Soldier or Chaos Emperor
if I'm not
Dragon.
mistaken.
Most of these 85% were playing both. Where the idea of a game
Could
dominated
be
by the 2
potential
Chaos
for
Monsters had
tributes.
once seemed ridiculous to a good chunk of the player base,
But
and now
who
seems just
knows?
as
Maybe
ridiculous
I'm
to
wrong.
think that there was anything that could come along and stop it.
I
The
gotta
equal
say,
update to the limited
this is
list, which only hurt Chaos
is
and
the
Manticore
longest-
decks, hadn't slowed the deck down.
If
The
y'all
release
want
a new
more
set
of
hadn't
these
slowed the
reaction
deck down.
videos,
And at the
leave them down
2004
in the
World
comments and tell
Championship,
me what I
it
should
became clear
react.
that even banning seemingly vital pieces
Maybe
of
some
the deck like
mustaches?
Yatagarasu and Painful Choice
Maybe
couldn't
some
stop it.
a
The World
bridge.
Championship, which this time was
Who
hosted on
knows?
July
Leave
25th
it down
in
in the
Los Angeles,
comments.
was a bit
Please.
different than prior high-profile Yu-Gi-Oh!
no idea what I'm
events. This was
doing.
the first official Yu-Gi-Oh! Event outside of regions where the OCG was played that didn't
final
use the
regions.
TCG's ban list. Since cards were released in the OCG well ahead of the TCG, the OCG's Forbidden and Limited list needed to be different to reflect this. All the way back on March 1st of 2004, at the same time Invasion of Chaos was
Interesting.
released in the TCG, the OCG
Fairly
released
interesting.
an update to the Forbidden and Limited list where multiple cards were actually
Injection
placed in the
Fairly.
Forbidden section. Many of these cards were staples, or at
My
least
God,
considered
that's
integral to
really good.
Chaos's
Painful
ability to
Choice,
function.
Raigeki,
This ban list with all 10 of these
yeah.
banned cards was used at the
They're all
2004
banned?
World Championship, and so for that reason, it's a bit difficult to judge the viability of certain deck builds or tech choices, but regardless, the ban list update didn't actually seem to affect Chaos's representation at the event. Just like at the US National Championship, about 85% of the decks present were Chaos decks, including the decks built by all of the players who made it to the top 4. All 4 of these players, and the winner of the event, Masatoshi Togawa from Japan in particular, were playing decks that seemed to be focused on Chaos. Togawa's list was notable for featuring 2 copies of Kaiku in the main deck, an extremely powerful anti-Chaos card, since keeping it on the field meant keeping one's opponent from summoning the Chaos monsters. Following this event, Chaos and all of its variants continued to perform exceptionally well all across the TCG. Many
Well, I
players
gotta
assumed
say,
that when the
the
TCG
meta
received its next
truly
ban
is
list update,
bizarre.
it would begin using the
We went
version of
from
the ban list that was
Jinzos
effective
to
at the 2004
Blacklusters
World Championship. And since that
and
list
the
hadn't
Mad
affected
Doctors.
Chaos's representation at all, it seemed like the
Just
deck was going to be
crazy
around
how
for a
they
very,
changed the
very
meta
long time. One thing that Upper
in
Deck
that
and Konami
time
had taken
span.
note of at the World Championship, however, was the
Man,
positive reaction to the ban list.
2000s
A lot of
were
people seemed pretty happy
crazy,
that they didn't have to
Yug.
worry about cards like Imperial Order,
2000s was
Harpy's Feather
crazy,
Duster, or
Yug.
Raigeki. And a lot of other players, not just limited to
It'll
those
have
who were
to do
present
with
at the
Joy
World
Wheeler
Championship,
Force.
seemed a little bit sick of the Chaos monsters. And so the TCG
Stuff's-
decided to take things a few
that's
steps
hard
further than the
to do.
OCG had.
Is
Well, it was
Joy
pretty obvious.
Wheeler.
Because there was
I
a
could do
major
Kaiba,
breakthrough
I could
after
do
Invasion
Yugi,
of
I could
Chaos,
do
which was
Pegasus,
the very
but
first
Joy Wheeler
ban
is
list.
probably the hardest accent.
Anything that felt like it would make the game
Like
not quote unquote
October.
fun, they were just completely taken out.
What happened?
On August 25th, through a somewhat unorthodox update to the Forbidden and Limited list, it was announced that 13 cards would be forbidden starting October 1st. The game would stay as it was for just over a month, and during this period,
15
Chaos continued
cards
to
will be
dominate as
forbidden.
expected.
The
At what was
Forbidden
then the
list.
largest Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournament
The
ever
list
with
of the
nearly
Forbidden
1,200 players, a European event named Battle City
has
Amsterdam,
been
every single
fully
player in the top 8 was playing both Blackluster
No one
Soldier
can
and
play.
Chaos Emperor Dragon, and
Good
6 of these
God,
players were
Jimmy.
also playing Yatagarasu. While the August announcements had upset a few people because, well, frankly, if the
A
October
lot of
list
people
looked anything
probably
like Upper
upset.
Deck said it was going to, it was
Yeah,
going to be a
I'm
total
thankful
bloodbath.
because
To a lot of
Chaos
people,
has
something
been
like this was
played
starting to
too
look pretty
many.
necessary. The game
Too
was
many
approaching
people
an event
switched to
horizon of
Chaos.
sorts, something conveyed extremely
We're
well by
about
the fact that just a week after these changes were
I'm
announced,
glad
but not
to finish
officially
this.
enforced, at a massive tournament with exponentially more player attendance than any tournaments
more
before it,
players
the
than
decks
experts.
created by the top 8
Bam,
players
Chaos.
there all shared at least 20 of the same cards.
Ain't
The
nobody
game was
cares
facing a
about the
serious diversity
Chaos
problem, or lack
anymore,
thereof, one that
thanks
only
to them
something this
ban
drastic
lists.
could fix. To say that it did change the game when these bans finally took effect effect on October 1st would be a massive understatement. This update was insane, borderline apocalyptic, and in addition to the bans that were announced back in August, this list also limited 5 cards out of the blue. Then, just like that, with the stroke of a pen from Upper Deck and Konami, Chaos, at least as people currently knew it, was totally annihilated.
Yep, Chaos, Yatagarasu, Sangan, Black Forest Girl,
along with the rest of the metagame.
Raigeki, Dark Hole, League of Duos, Harpies, Monster Brawler, and
to say, this changed
Force.
things a lot. Many of these cards were in a league of their own in terms of popularity, to the extent that the term staple doesn't do them justice. It can be said without hyperbole that most of them were included in literally every successful tournament deck. Of the 3 banned cards that this didn't apply to, 2 of them had been key pieces in the most powerful deck in the game. That said, the list didn't fundamentally change the game as much as one might expect. There were still quite a few building blocks left over from the previous format that people could use as a foundation for deck building. Seeing as there were also a lot of cards that people had experimented with throughout the reign of the Chaos Monsters, there was actually still plenty to work with when constructing this new metagame. Plus, on top of that, there were 2 more core booster sets scheduled to be released around this time. As long as both of them weren't repeats of the Ancient Sanctuary situation, then they'd have to include some new cards that could help fill the void.
And that's why we got
Soul of the Duelist was released on October 1st, the same day these ban list changes took effect, and the next set, Rise of Destiny, wasn't far behind. It came out just 2 months later on the 1st of December for most TCG players, though some regions, like France and Spain, received the set even earlier on the 1st of November. These sets both shared the same major issue, which was that they were mostly filled with lackluster cards. There are many things about them that are arguably more interesting than the cards they added to the game, actually. Soul of the Duelist was the first TCG booster set to follow the OCG's release structure. The OCG's core sets had always brought less cards to the table than individual releases in the TCG, and that's because the TCG had always combined 2 of the OCG's smaller packs into 1 larger pack. The packs didn't actually contain more cards inside them, but drew from a larger card pool. Since this was the first set to be a 1-to-1 import of an OCG set, Soul of the Duelist surprised players by only adding 60 new cards to the game. It also removed secret rares entirely, which in theory meant that many of the set's better cards would be easier to obtain. The thing is, the set really only had 1 good card, and that was Mobius the Frost Monarch. With Feather Duster banned and Mystical Space Typhoon limited, spell and trap removal had become much more scarce than many players were used to. This card allowed players to easily destroy multiple cards in their opponent's back row, which made it a popular side deck option moving forward. But that was it, really. Pajama King and Sandwich were decent cards that could be summoned with Magical Scientist, and there were some other cards in the set that saw experimentation around this time period, but none of them made their way into topping deck lists at premier events, aside from occasionally popping up in 1 or 2 side decks here and there. Rise of Destiny was very similar in terms of how it impacted the game. Darkblade the Dragon Knight was another popular fusion monster that could be summoned by Magical Scientist, and 2 tramp cards from the set, Divine Wrath and Pikaru Circle of Enchantment, made their way into tournament deck lists almost immediately, but usually only in the side deck and only occasionally. Something else that was unique about these sets is that neither of them prompted a dedicated ban list update. This had technically been true of Ancient Sanctuary as well, though according to Upper Deck, the October 1st list had been, quote, updated for Ancient Sanctuary. All things considered, the Titanic ban list update, the changes to the way the ban list was handled, and to the core booster sets, the game felt noticeably different from this point forward, and these weren't even the only new developments in the tournament scene. While regional tournaments were still happening just as frequently as they had been before, starting in December they'd be joined by a new kind of tournament called Shonen Jump Championships. These events were hosted jointly, in part by Upper Deck and in part by Shonen Jump, the company responsible for publishing the Yu-Gi-Oh manga. According to Upper Deck, SJC tournaments were meant to be a tier above regionals in terms of prestige, not on the same level as something like the World Championship, of course, but essentially the height of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh during the normal tournament season. Among the top 8, deck lists were somewhat varied since the new meta was still far from solved, but there was one type of deck that was more popular than everything else. It actually had a few different names because it wasn't particularly well defined at this point. One of its most popular names was Cookie Cutter, since while each version of the deck usually wasn't the same from person to person, it was generally thought of as an assortment of various staple cards. In Metagame.com's coverage of SJC Gen Con, they called this deck Hybrid, though many players still called it Chaos Control because it almost always played Black Luster Soldier along along with a suite of light and dark monsters. The deck's identity and game plan certainly weren't as clear as those of prior decks like Beatdown, Control, and Chaos, but most players knew they were looking at it when they saw it. This deck, whatever it was, took up 6 of the top 8 spots at SJC Gen Con, and all 6 of them were playing Black Luster Soldier, in addition to 21 more of the exact same cards. 29 of the same cards can be found in at least 5 of the 6 cookie cutter main decks, 31 in at least 4, and 37 in at least 3. Given how much all of these lists had in common, it was pretty much impossible to deny that this deck did have a unique identity, even if it was one that was much less pronounced than most players were used to. The remaining 2 top 8 players were Henry K playing Magical Scientist FTK and Miguel Flores playing an Earth deck. Miguel's deck was pretty similar to the other cookie cutter lists in a lot of ways, so in order to distinguish between the 2 of them, it wasn't uncommon to call the more popular version of the deck Cookie Cutter Chaos and to call other non-Chaos versions of the deck Cookie Cutter Blank, in this case Cookie Cutter Earth. One thing that's particularly striking about the deck lists here is the lack of cards from Soul of the Duelist and Rise of Destiny. Some of them were present, but the tournament was dominated by cards from March of 2004 and earlier. The only deck present in the top 8 that significantly benefited from any new cards was Magical Scientist, which was made even more consistent by the newly released Serial Spell and by Monster Gate from Ancient Sanctuary. Dark Magician of Chaos, Reload, and the slew of new fusion monsters with more than 2100 attack points didn't hurt either, so the Magical Scientist deck present at this tournament was probably the most consistent version of the deck so far. Things didn't change too much in the coming months, at least not on a macro level. At the next 3 SJC events, which all took place in February of 2005, Cookie Cutter Chaos either maintained or increased the top 8 representation it had established at SJC Gen Con. Now, while the big picture metagame mostly stayed the same, the perception of all sorts of individual cards changed to varying degrees throughout this time period. All sorts of experimental stuff saw tournament success as the format continued to develop, and some of these cards even managed to catch on as key players in the metagame. The relatively newly released Blade Knight and DD Assailant, cards both released as part of different promo packs in the last quarter of 2004, were quite a bit more popular in February than they had been in December. Some people in the top 8 of SJC Gen Con had been playing Blade Knight, but it was a lot more common to see this at the 3 SJCs that happened in February. DD Assailant went from not being present in the top 8 of SJC Gen Con at all to being somewhat popular among top 8 players at all 3 SJCs in February. This was a little bit surprising since he wasn't a light or a dark monster, and his effect was a little bit worse than DD Warrior Ladies, but this definitely wasn't the weirdest meta trend of early 2005. With Mystical Space Typhoon Limited, the combo of using Mirage of Nightmare together with it had become significantly harder to do, but nobody actually wanted to stop playing Mirage of Nightmare, so it became fairly standard to play a copy or 2 of Emergency Provisions just to destroy the Mirage and keep all the cards it allowed the player to draw. This was the only thing that generated any interest in this card from tournament players, though. A card named Metamorphosis from Pharaonic Guardian also kept popping up here and there, usually just as a one-of in the main deck. Now, this card hadn't been completely invisible since its release back in 2003 or anything, but it had never been at the forefront of the metagame. A few months after it was added to the card pool, Magical Scientist was released, a searchable way to summon a bunch of fusion monsters all at once without losing any card advantage. Metamorphosis forced whoever was using it to tribute a monster first, before they could summon the fusion monster. This was a 2-card investment, since the Metamorphosis itself had to be used, and it had to take a monster off of the field with it. Compared to Magical Scientist, who stayed on the field after using his effect, this felt obsolete, like a needlessly bigger commitment. More people started experimenting with it in 2004, after the release of Invasion of Chaos, because one important thing that was better about it than Magical Scientist was the fact that it kept the fusion monster it summoned on the field permanently, at least until the monster was destroyed. This was important for a couple of reasons. Like, first of all, it was a lot easier to put a monster summoned by Metamorphosis into the graveyard than it was to put a monster summoned by Magical Scientist into the graveyard. Usually, the monsters summoned by Scientist ended up in the extra deck. It was possible to get them into the graveyard, just not particularly practical. There were also plenty of good fusion monsters that had really good effects while they were on the field. Effects that were good regardless of whose turn it was. The best examples of this were Thousand Eyes Restrict and Last Warrior from Another Planet, cards that were significantly more impactful if they managed to stay on the field for more than one turn. Now, by 2005, Magical Scientist wasn't searchable anymore because both Sengen and Witch were banned. Plus, now that players didn't have to worry about both Black Luster Soldier and Chaos Emperor Dragon together in the game at the same time, Yu-Gi-Oh! Had slowed down enough to make a lot of the monsters that this card could summon viable control tools. Magical Scientist was still the preferred choice for summoning fusion monsters at this point, significantly more popular than Metamorphosis was. But this could only stay true, of course, as long as Magical Scientist was legal to play. The player base was expecting a new ban list update at any moment now, after all, and the last one had gone pretty far out of its way to get rid of any problematic cards, which most players agreed Magical Scientist was one of. The card was definitely a relic of a bygone era that many players wanted to see gone, and well, if the promotional material for the next booster set was indicative of anything, it seemed like the game was more than willing to leave some aspects of its roots behind. For the first time ever, Yugi wasn't even on the cover of the next booster set. In fact, one of the Japanese posters advertising the set featured a totally different guy who looked like he was from an anime, but he definitely wasn't from Duel Monsters.
GX. And that was the complete history of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta Part 1. Subscribe. And he hasn't... Oh, wow. There will not be a Part 2. Oh, wow. Oh, okay. Wow, okay, so... Okay, well, it's gonna take... It's been 3 years. Okay, well... I hope he's doing well. And I guess that's it. Thank you guys for watching. Comment, like, and subscribe. And I'll see you all next time, I guess. Bye.